3 days before my younger brother's execution, I was handed the court's final decision. A retrial had been denied. Haruto Mori was to die on Friday morning. I read the sheet twice, not out of hope. I simply wanted to memorize the names of the people who had signed off on the death of an innocent man. Haruto had been accused of murdering an auditor for the Kuroda Construction Group. The main evidence was parking lot footage, brief, clean, far too convenient. In the recording, a man wearing Haruto's jacket stepped out of the victim's car with a knife in his hand. His face was hard to make out, yet the investigators called the image irrefutable. I was not a lawyer, I designed engineering systems, and I was used to studying details. So I played the footage again, then all night long. On the 101st viewing, I noticed a reflection in the car's side window. Behind the killer, an advertising screen was glowing with a poster for the Sumida River Festival. I opened the outdoor advertising archive. The festival campaign had only begun on Monday. The auditor was killed on Friday, 3 days before the campaign launched. Someone had assembled the recording later and made a mistake with the background. A tiny detail. For my brother, it was the difference between death row and life. I went to the Tokyo Public Prosecutor's office without an appointment. They made me wait for 2 hours in reception. A useful reminder. Someone else's death rarely disrupts a work schedule. Investigator Takeda received me in a windowless office. Gray suit, clean desk, tea he never once touched. A cautious man. I placed the frame with the screen and the campaign dates in front of him. The video was edited. You must halt the execution and request the original storage medium. Takeda did not look at the papers. Mr. Mori, the court has already evaluated the evidence. I gave a humorless laugh. The court saw an image. I'm showing you an error. He slowly closed Haruto's file. You're an engineer, not an expert. I answered, exactly. It took even an engineer only one night to see what you failed to find in a year. For a second, Takeda's fingers froze on the edge of the folder. That was the instant I needed. Not an admission, not anger. The reaction of a man who had been hit precisely where it hurt. He pressed a button on his desk. A secretary entered and politely asked me to leave. Takeda called after me, "Don't turn grief into a crime." A fine phrase, almost caring, except that once I was in the corridor, I saw him step out of his office and quickly call someone. Downstairs, a young assistant prosecutor caught up with me. He did not introduce himself. He simply said, "Don't come here again. They may move the execution forward." I asked why he was helping me. The young man looked away. "I'm not helping. I just don't want to see this case in the news and remember that I stayed silent." An hour later, I sat across from Haruto's attorney in a cafe near Kasumigaseki. Yamamoto looked as though he had slept in his own suit for a month. He studied my frames and turned pale. This is enough to request an expert examination, but not enough for an emergency stay of execution. The court will demand the original file. I asked where the original was. Yamamoto shook his head. The case file contains only a certified copy. Takeda claims the original was destroyed according to procedure. They had destroyed the original recording in a death penalty case. Even in a bad detective story, it would have sounded lazy. In real life, it sounded dangerous. Yamamoto leaned closer. Before his arrest, Haruto tried to give me a letter. They took it along with his personal belongings before our meeting. What was in the letter? I asked. He smiled wearily. Had I known, your brother would not be sitting on death row right now. Among Haruto's belongings was a cloth omamori from an Asakusa shrine. Our father had given it to my brother on the day he entered university. Haruto laughed at the charm, but he always carried it. And on the day of his arrest, he sent me his last message. Don't throw away the amulet. Back then, I thought he was saying goodbye. Now I understood. Haruto had not been asking me to preserve a memory. He had been trying to tell me where he had hidden evidence. Yamamoto requested an urgent visit. The answer came surprisingly quickly. Tomorrow morning. 15 minutes through glass. Takeda wanted to see what I had understood. I did not sleep that night. I found old plans of the Tokyo detention house where Haruto was being held. 5 years earlier, my firm had replaced the ventilation in its laundry facility. I did not know any secret passages. They did not exist. I knew something else. Which wing was old, where the service routes ran, and who had access to prisoners' belongings. In the morning, Yamamoto met me at the checkpoint. He said, "Don't promise him you'll save him." I answered, "I promised him that before I learned how to speak." Haruto entered the visitation room in a gray uniform. He had lost so much weight that the collar looked as if it belonged to someone else. but his gaze remained stubborn. "Our family defect." He picked up the receiver and spoke first. "You look awful." I smirked. "Thanks. You're not ready for the family album either." His lips twitched. Almost a smile. Then he looked at the red recording light above the glass, and the prison appeared between us again. I could not ask about the memory card directly, so I said, "Does Mom still keep your amulet on the altar at home?" Haruto froze for only a second. Then he lowered his eyes. "Tell her the guards have the amulet. There's nothing valuable left inside." Nothing left, meaning there had been something before. I gripped the receiver more tightly. "Who opened it?" He glanced at the guard by the door. "Takeda came after the trial. Said he was inspecting my personal belongings." Haruto exhaled. "Akira, forget this. He already knows what you're looking for." I asked, "Why didn't you tell your lawyer sooner?" My brother smiled without humor. "Because someone died in this case. I didn't know who else I could trust." That hurt worse than an accusation. I was his older brother, and he had sat there alone, with evidence hidden in the seam of a cheap amulet, not knowing whether I would ever reach him. Haruto leaned closer to the glass. "I saw a payment, Akira. Auditor Shibata found a transfer from Kuroda to someone in the prosecutor's office." "Takeda?" I asked. Haruto did not answer. He only looked at the recording light. That was enough. The fabricated video now had an owner. The guard raised a hand. 2 minutes. Haruto spoke faster. "If the amulet is empty, find Seki from the laundry. She saw who took the package." I wanted to ask how to find her. The line disconnected. The guard was already leading my brother to the door. Haruto turned back and formed one word with his lips. "Love." I stood at the glass until the door closed behind him. A fine request. Almost impossible when your younger brother is walking toward execution. Takeda was waiting for me on the way out, not in his office, right by the turnstile, where cameras could see every movement. He smiled as if we were old acquaintances. "Did the visit help you accept the inevitable?" he asked. I answered, "It helped me understand why you're more afraid of a cloth amulet than of a murderer." The smile remained on his face, not in his eyes. Takeda stepped aside and let me pass. He had no intention of arguing where there were witnesses. 10 minutes later, Yamamoto received a call. The execution date had been moved to the morning after tomorrow, not 3 days, less than 48 hours. Takeda did not try to prove I was wrong. He simply took away time. That was when I finally understood. My enemy was not a foolish bureaucrat. He was a professional. Yamamoto grabbed me by the sleeve. "We're filing an emergency petition." I asked, "With what?" A reflection on glass and my fear? He was silent. He did not like it when I was right. Neither did I. But Haruto could not wait for the system to suddenly remember it had a conscience. I had 2 paths. Try to reach the court without the original, or get into the place where Takeda kept the stolen evidence and the witness from the laundry. I chose the second. Not because it was smarter, because the first was already killing my brother slowly, neatly, and with all the proper seals. That evening, I went to the contractor's archive at the Justice Administration office. It held access logs for service areas and the storage room for personal belongings. I had an old service key. It should have been collected after the repairs, but accounting had lost the return form. Sometimes bureaucratic laziness saves lives. Before entering, I sent Naomi Ito, a crime reporter, an email containing the frame with the advertising screen and a time-delayed publication. We were not friends. She had once written about a ventilation failure at one of my sites. That was why I knew. If she saw filth, she would not look away. The archive clerk on duty left for tea at 9:40. I entered through the service door. My heart was beating far too loudly for a man with such a quiet plan. Inside there were no gleaming servers or screens flashing red warnings. Only shelves, index cards, seals, and the smell of paper on which fates are decided. I found Haruto's file in a cabinet of sealed materials. It had been moved there after sentencing, meaning someone had come back to clean up traces. The personal belongings log opened to the page I needed. The Mori had been received at arrest. 2 days after the trial, an unscheduled inspection had been conducted. Takeda's signature was in the grounds column. In the witness column was the name of a service worker, Kiyomi Seki. Haruto had not been wrong. I photographed the sheet and sent it to Yamamoto and Naomi. Then I turned on the recorder on my phone. If they caught me, at least my fear would be useful. The archive lights came on directly behind me. Takeda stood in the doorway. Beside him were 2 guards and a man in a coat with the Kuroda emblem on his cufflinks. The investigator sighed. "I had hoped you would remain a grieving brother." I raised my hands. "And I had hoped you were better at hiding signatures." The man in the coat punched me in the stomach. I fell to my knees and swallowed my cry. Takeda did not flinch. He had already seen people break for the sake of his paperwork. He crouched beside me. "Who did you send the photographs to?" I wiped blood from my lip. "Enough people to make killing me inconvenient." Takeda looked at the phone in my hand. I had erased the send history in advance. A small precaution, not salvation. But it forced him to think. "You'll be detained for unlawful access to investigative materials," he said, "and you'll talk until I find out where the copies are." I slowly lifted my head. "In the same detention center where Haruto is being held?" For a second, he said nothing. Finally, I had forced him to answer without words. Takeda adjusted his cuff. "You won't see him. Solitary confinement. No calls. No lawyer until the first interrogation." He was right. I could not count on fortunate proximity to my brother, but he himself was taking me to the place where Seki worked, and the trail of his forgery lay waiting.
This is the first time Akira wins, not through force or some miraculous hack. He forces Takeda to choose the lesser risk. Letting him go is dangerous. Killing him is too conspicuous. Prison is all that remains.
Only now Akira is entering it, not blindly, but along his own brother's trail. They led me out into the rain through a service door. In the car, Takeda sat opposite me and closed the partition. Courtesy ended with the witnesses. "Kuroda can bury both of you," he said. I answered. "Then it's strange that he needed an investigator who gets nervous over an amulet." Takeda leaned forward. "The execution is the morning after tomorrow. If you name the recipients of the files before dawn, I'll ask them to restore the previous date." He was offering me the chance to buy my brother one more day of life. Not freedom, not truth, only a day, and he knew exactly how valuable that could be. I said, "You won't be able to erase every copy." Takeda smiled. "I don't need to. I only need the court to see them after the execution." That was why he was dangerous. He had no intention of winning forever. He only needed to win for 2 days. After that, Haruto's innocence would become posthumous news. The car turned toward the walls of the Tokyo detention house. Rain glittered on the concrete. Behind one of those walls, my brother was already counting his final hours. At intake, they took my belt, shoelaces, and watch. The officer on duty wrote my name on a paper card. No magic, just order, the kind that kills slowly. Takeda personally specified a cell in the old service wing. I heard his order from the corridor and almost smiled. He had chosen a place I remembered. The escort led me past locked doors. I was not looking at the locks. I was looking at the numbers on the ventilation sections. Kasumi ran downward, to the laundry. Sumida ran to the medical corridor and the death row block. The old labels had not been removed after the repairs. Sometimes the past leaves useful signs behind. The woman from the laundry, the section along her route. Haruto had not given me hope. He had given me my first real line of movement. The cell door closed behind me. The room was empty. Narrow bunk, sink, wall. No flash drive hidden in the bricks, and no miracle. Takeda's voice came through the peephole. "Think until morning. Tell me who received the photographs, and I'll allow you to say goodbye to your brother." I walked up to the door. "After a fabricated video, your word is worth less than a prison dinner." Silence hung outside the door. Then his footsteps moved away. I sat on the bunk and allowed myself to be afraid for the first time. Not for myself, for the possibility that Haruto could die while I studied walls and played at being the clever older brother. After lights out, a cart passed along the corridor. The hatch in the door opened. An elderly woman in a service uniform placed a dinner tray inside. She did not look at me. She only let her fingers linger on the tray. Beneath the bowl of soup lay a thin, folded sheet of paper, damp from the steam. I waited until her footsteps were gone and opened the paper. The handwriting was familiar. Haruto always wrote the letter H too wide, as though it never had enough room. The note contained 3 lines. "The amulet is empty. Takeda has the card. Safe in interrogation room. Seki knows more. Don't look for me first." I reread the last sentence and exhaled through my teeth. My younger brother was sitting in a death row cell and was still trying to order his older brother around. My first plan died before it began. I had come for the amulet, and the evidence was already in the enemy's hands. But Haruto was no longer simply someone who needed to be carried out. He had found a witness, learned about the safe, passed a note. Even under sentence of death, he was not waiting to be saved. He was building the rescue with me. At the end of the corridor, the woman with the cart told a guard, "Seki has finished distribution." Her voice was calm. That is what courage looks like without grand speeches. Behind the wall, the radio in the duty room came on. The news reported that Haruto Mori's execution had been scheduled for the morning after tomorrow. Less than 48 hours. A solitary cell. A clever investigator with the evidence in his safe, a billionaire with men outside, and a brother who had already made his move. I hid the note in the mattress seam, walked to the ventilation grill, and quietly said, "Hold on, Haruto." Then I began counting Seki's footsteps outside the door. I did not sleep during my first night in solitary confinement, not because I feared the walls. I was waiting for Seki's cart and counting how many seconds the guards watched her walk away. The cart passed at midnight and again before dawn. Each time, one guard opened the hatch while the other stayed at the post. Only their yawns changed. The old wing had no secret tunnels. It did have routines. Hot water was delivered before rounds. Laundry was taken away after tea service. I ran my fingers along the ventilation grill. Not even a child could crawl through it, but sound could travel through metal farther than a door allowed. When Haruto and I were children, we tapped on the radiator whenever our parents shut us in separate rooms. 3 knocks meant, "Are you alive?" 2 meant, "I'm here." I tapped my knuckles against the grill. 3 short knocks, pause, 2. All I got back was the hum of air and someone else's cough in the corridor. Either the pipe did not reach Haruto's block, or he could not answer. I did not like either option. Time was already working for Takeda. A young employee, not Seki, brought the morning tray. He kept his eyes lowered and pulled his hand away too quickly. Takeda was standing behind him in the corridor. The investigator entered the cell carrying a folder and a folding chair. No guards inside, no threats at the threshold. Men like him offer a choice first. He placed a sheet on the bunk. Sign a statement. Admit that you fabricated the frame with the advertisement yourself, and the execution will be moved back to its previous date. I looked at the paper. You're offering my brother one more day of life in exchange for my lie? Takeda adjusted his cuff. I'm offering you time. At the bottom of the second page was the name of the Kuroda company. Not as the accused, as the party whose reputation had allegedly suffered from my statements. I raised the sheet. You even wrote your master's name into a fabricated confession. Takeda smiled. The word master does not read well in an official record. He was calm because the truth could not catch up with the execution schedule. I needed evidence. He needed only the morning after tomorrow. I asked, "Why does Kuroda need my brother dead?" Takeda looked directly at me for the first time. Ask Haruto what he stole from his employer. He knew more than he showed, and he wanted me to understand. This case had not begun with the video. The video was the lid on something far dirtier. Takeda stood. Until this evening. After that, your signature won't help anymore. He left the sheet on the bunk. Bait works better when it remains in sight. When the door closed, I tore the sheet into 4 pieces. Not out of pride, I simply did not want Haruto to know that I had bargained with his name. An hour later, I was taken for a medical examination. A formality before interrogation, the escort said. In prison, formalities often conceal someone else's curiosity. The escort's name was Fujita, young, tall, without the usual contempt in his eyes. He checked my handcuffs and said, "Don't try anything stupid." I answered, "At this point, it's too late to start doing stupid things." The corner of his mouth twitched, but he immediately returned to his official expression. The medical corridor ran alongside the Samita section. Old signs had remained on the walls after the repairs. That line went toward the condemned prisoners. The doctor measured my blood pressure and asked whether my stomach hurt after the detention. I looked at the bruise, only when I remember what I got it for. Fujita looked up at the guard by the door. The man turned away. The blow from Kuroda's man had not made it into the official report, but now it had been noticed. I asked to wash my face. In the restroom, beneath the sink, was a service panel. 2 screws. I had no tools, only the metal clip from my mask. The first screw gave way quickly. The second stuck. Outside the door, Fujita said, "You have 1 minute." It sounded less like a threat than a warning. I removed the panel, pressed my lips to the cold pipe, and tapped with the clip. 3 short knocks. Pause. 2. The second stretched longer than a sentence of death. The answer came barely audibly. 1 knock, then 2. Our old signal had changed, but I understood. Haruto was alive, and he could hear me. I whispered, "Takeda's safe, the card." The metal swallowed half the words. Slow taps came back. Card important, not alone. Fujita knocked on the door. Time. I managed to ask only, "Seki?" Haruto's answer was brief. "Trust her." I screwed the panel back on as best I could. When I came out, Fujita looked at the scratch on my hand and the damp floor by the wall. He said, "Old pipes are poorly insulated." I met his gaze. It was not a question. He understood that I had spoken with my brother, and for now he kept silent. On the way back to the cell, he stopped at a water dispenser. The second guard walked ahead. Fujita said quietly, "Takeda barred your lawyer without grounds." I asked, "And that surprises you?" He squeezed the bottle. "It surprises me when a man is prepared for execution faster than I can fill out a form." He opened the cell door and, more loudly now, ordered me inside. Before locking it, he added, "Don't trust everyone who brings dinner." Wonderful. Now I had an investigator who saw every risk, a brother behind a pipe, and a guard whose help I had not yet earned. After lunch, Seki came. She placed the tray inside and lingered as though checking the hatch lock. I quietly said, "Was Shibata your relative?" Her shoulders froze, only for an instant. Then she closed the hatch and left. 10 minutes later, another note appeared beneath my teacup. "Nephew, night cleaning, don't speak at door." 5 words, enough to understand why an elderly woman was risking her freedom. I tore up the note and soaked the fragments in the cup. Takeda might search my cell. Seki had already lost her nephew. I would not give her to him too. That evening, they took me for questioning. The room was on the second floor behind a glass door bearing a prosecutor's office sign. The safe had to be there as well. Takeda sat at the table. Beside him were water, a recorder, and a folder. Everything clean, everything lawful in appearance. That is exactly what dangerous rooms look like. He turned on the recording. "Mr. Mori, you unlawfully entered the archive. Who helped you obtain information about the convicted prisoner's belongings?" I looked at the camera in the corner. "Are you asking as an investigator, or as the man who opened my brother's amulet after the trial?" Takeda did not blink. "Your assumption is irrelevant to the charge." I smiled. "So you do not deny the inspection itself?" He switched off the recorder. Just like that. The official conversation ended the moment it became inconvenient. The real case remained in the room. Takeda took a cloth omamori from his pocket and laid it on the table. The seam had been carefully ripped open. There was nothing inside, only white lining. "Did you come for this?" he asked. I forced myself not to look for too long. Haruto had carried that charm for 10 years. Now it was bait. I answered, "No, I came to see who keeps it in his pocket." For a second, his fingers tightened. A small victory. Nowhere near enough. He put the omamori back in his pocket. There was no memory card in it. I did not hear a denial, only the careful wording of a man who knew the value of words. Someone dropped a metal bucket outside the door. A sharp crash. Takeda turned his head. I saw a small gray safe on the wall behind him. There were no fingerprints on the keypad, but a paper checkout tag hung beneath the lock. I managed to remember the last 2 digits of the room number. Takeda looked at me again. "Do you hope to get out of here?" I shrugged. "I hope you'll keep showing me useful things." He stood abruptly. He was no longer smiling. "Your brother spent his whole life hiding behind you. Now you'll die from your need to be needed." I rose slowly, as far as the handcuffs allowed. At least Haruto doesn't sell innocent people to a man in an expensive coat. The door opened. Fujita came in for me. Takeda ordered that I be transferred to a new block after the night rounds. His patience had run out. On the way back, Fujita walked in silence. At the stairs, he quietly asked, "Did you see what you were looking for?" I answered, "I saw where they hide it." He breathed out through his nose. "You think I'll open a door for you?" I looked at his badge. "No, I think you don't want to close it on the truth." Fujita said nothing, but he returned me to my old cell even though the transfer order was already in his hand. I had gained several hours. That night, Seki came with laundry bags instead of dinner. She opened the hatch and said more loudly than usual, "Take off your shirt. Replacement." I gave her my prison shirt. A thin strip of paper had been sewn under the collar of the new one. Seki knew how to pass messages without exchanging a single glance. The strip read, "Takeda took the card. I saw him, but Shibata made a copy of the payment ledger. Haruto knows who he sent it to." Everything had become more complicated and better at the same time. The card proved the video was fabricated. The payment ledger connected Takeda to Kuroda. We needed both. I scratched 2 words onto the back of the strip. Interrogation. Cart. When Seki took the shirt away, our eyes never even met. I walked to the grill and tapped the code again. Haruto's response came after a long pause. He was clearly not alone, or already too weakened. I sent, "Who has ledger?" The metal stayed silent for a long time. Then my brother tapped out a surname in syllables. "Ogawa, Yokohama Port." I knew the name. Miyuki Ogawa had worked as auditor Shibata's assistant. After the murder, she disappeared from the witness list before the first hearing. Haruto continued. She's alive. I hid the address with Yamamoto. I almost laughed. The lawyer had been carrying the answer in his own folder without realizing it. I sent, "Why stay silent?" The answer came quickly. Listening devices. And you'd go alone. Bad news. He was right again. Footsteps sounded in the corridor. I moved away from the grill. Fujita looked in through the peephole. His face was paler than it had been during the day. He opened the door and entered with handcuffs. The transfer begins now. Takeda came personally to make sure you don't speak to the laundry staff. I asked, "Is there a route to the new block past the interrogation room?" Fujita looked at me as though I were an idiot. "Fair enough, probably. There's a corridor past it," he said. "But there's a camera at the door, and Takeda has 2 men. I nodded. "I need him to open the safe himself." Fujita shook his head. "You don't know when to stop." I answered, "My brother is being executed in the morning. I'll stop after him." Before leaving the cell, I rolled up Seki's paper strip and swallowed it. The taste of paper was better than the taste of someone else's confidence. Takeda was waiting by the stairs. Beside him stood Kuroda's man in the same dark coat. Apparently, he had one outfit for every dirty job. The investigator said, "Last chance. The address of the copies, and you'll see Haruto before the execution." I lowered my head, pretending to be exhausted. "I'll tell you," I answered. Takeda did not smile. He was too smart to believe me immediately. "In the interrogation room," I added. He ordered Fujita to turn back. We entered the familiar room. The camera above the door blinked red. The recorder was placed on the table again. Takeda sat opposite me. "Speak." I looked at the omamori in his pocket. "First, show me that Haruto is still alive." Kuroda's man smirked. "Bargaining." Takeda raised a hand to silence him. That was the difference between them. One hit, the other thought. The investigator took out his phone and dialed an internal number. "Bring condemned prisoner Mori to the glass in the medical corridor." No contact. I could scarcely believe my luck. Then I understood. He wanted to test us too. If Haruto signaled to me, Takeda would see the connection. My brother appeared beyond the glass in the neighboring corridor. 2 guards held his arms. He was pale, but he was walking on his own. Haruto saw me and did not change expression. Good. Then he looked at Takeda's pocket, where the edge of the amulet protruded, and barely clenched his fist. It was not fear. It was a signal. The amulet mattered. The card really was there, or it was connected to what he had hidden. I could not understand more precisely. I said loudly, "I'm sorry." Haruto answered, "Don't start now." Alive, almost annoyed. Takeda had expected tears and got the 2 of us as we had always been. I continued, "The letter is with the lawyer. The address is in the blue folder." It was a lie wrapped in truth. I wanted Takeda to go after Yamamoto. Haruto understood immediately. He gave a dry laugh. "You always hid important things in blue folders." "Thank you, little brother." Now the bait looked like a family habit. Takeda cut the internal connection and ordered Haruto taken away. Then he looked at Kuroda's man. "Check the lawyer." Quietly. I wanted to hit myself for my own plan. Yamamoto was in danger, but now Takeda had to divide his men and his attention. Fujita tightened the handcuffs as if preparing me for transfer. His thumb pressed my wrist once. He had heard everything. Takeda opened the safe behind him. Not fully, only enough to take out the package containing the omamori and hand it to Kuroda's man before the search. Inside, I saw 2 packages. One held the amulet, the other bore the marking of Shibata's case. Haruto had not merely hidden the video, he had connected the cases. Kuroda's man took the package with the amulet and headed for the door. Fujita suddenly said, "Physical evidence cannot be removed without a log entry." The room froze. Takeda slowly turned his head. "Do you want to discuss regulations now, Officer Fujita?" Fujita turned pale but did not back down. "The camera is recording. I don't want to sign off on a violation." That was all. He had chosen a side without a grand vow. Takeda stepped to the panel and switched off the camera with a key. Now it isn't recording. A bad move for a man accustomed to hiding behind procedure. I jerked my hands downward. Fujita loosened his grip just enough for the handcuff chain to strike Kuroda's man across the wrist. The package fell. I lunged for it, but Takeda was faster. He struck me in the shoulder with a chair and seized the second package from the safe. A smart enemy takes what matters most. Fujita shoved Kuroda's man into the table. Seki flung open the door from outside and rolled her cart straight into Takeda's path. The investigator kept his footing. Of course he did. He leapt over the cart and tore into the corridor with the Shibata case package in his hand. I picked up the amulet from the floor. I could feel a hard rectangle inside it. Haruto's card was in my hands. The proof of the payment was leaving with Takeda. The alarm ripped through the silence. Fujita grabbed my shoulder. Choose, after him or to your brother. In 1 minute, everything will be sealed off. I looked toward the direction in which Haruto had been taken, then toward the stairs where Takeda had disappeared. I hate choices in which both doors are right. A tapping sound came through the pipe in the wall. 3 short knocks. 2. Haruto could still hear us. Then came a new signal, one we had not used in years. Go after the evidence. I closed my hand around the amulet. My younger brother was leaving himself behind bars again, so I would not lose the only chance to clear his name. Fujita opened the service door toward the laundry. Seki was already removing her apron, understanding that she would never return to an ordinary shift. I said, Takeda will leave through the prosecutor's entrance. Fujita nodded. Then you go out through the service yard. You can intercept his car there. Behind me, guards were shouting orders. Ahead, a clever enemy was carrying away the second package. In my pocket was the card Haruto had risked the morning for. I turned toward the ventilation wall and quietly said, I'll come back. There was no answer, only the alarm and footsteps. This time, the promise would have to be proven. The alarm hit the corridors before Fujita could close the service door. Takeda was running for the prosecutor's exit. I was running after the package in his hand. Seki pushed the cart ahead of herself, knocking over empty laundry baskets. A strange pursuit squad, an escaped detainee, a prison guard, and a woman in a work apron. Fujita stopped at the staircase and thrust a ring of keys into my hand. Through the laundry to the yard. I'll lock down the block and say you hit me. I seized his sleeve. Takeda will destroy you. He pulled his arm free. If I leave with you, Haruto will be completely alone in here. That is how a man chooses a side. No speech about honor, no beautiful music. He simply stays in the prison beside the person he can still protect. Seki had already opened the laundry door. Steam hit my face. Beyond the machines hummed the service exit used to remove linens and maintenance trash. I turned back to Fujita. Don't let them move Haruto without a record. He nodded. And you don't come back empty-handed. Seki and I slipped between the dryers. A second siren wailed outside. That meant Takeda had already reported losing me and the card. 2 laundry vans and a black prosecutor's sedan stood in the yard. The sedan tore away the instant I ran out into the rain. Takeda's profile flashed in the back seat. He saw me through the glass and did not duck. He simply raised the package as though showing me he had won this round. I rushed to the van. The driver jumped out of the cab when he heard the alarm. Seki stood in front of him and said, My nephew died because of those people. The driver looked at her face, then at my handcuffs. He asked nothing. He simply tossed me the keys. Sometimes one look contains enough explanation. I got behind the wheel. Seki climbed in beside me. The gates were already closing, but a service van was heavier than the barrier and more important than someone else's rules. Metal scraped across the bumper. A guard leapt aside and raised his radio. I shot onto the wet street, leaving the prison and my brother behind. Seki looked back until the walls vanished around a turn. Haruto knew you would go after the evidence. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. He should not have known. She answered, He is not a child. He was helping Mr. Shibata even before his arrest. You came to save your brother, but he was already saving the truth. Takeda's sedan was 2 intersections ahead. I could see its taillights in the traffic until it turned onto a service road by the station. I increased speed. Seki grabbed the dashboard. If you crash, no one will bring the boy back. A useful observation. I eased off the accelerator. Takeda was not heading to the prosecutor's office. He was going toward the tunnel beneath the elevated line, where there were no news cameras and no curious passers-by. At the tunnel exit, the sedan stopped, a door opened, and Kuroda's man from the interrogation room transferred into another vehicle carrying Shibata's package. Had Takeda kept the amulet? No, I already had the amulet. He had handed the important thing to a man who could not be linked to the prosecutor's office with a single inquiry. I struck the steering wheel. Seki did not flinch. Remember the number. She was already reading the license plate aloud while Kuroda's vehicle disappeared into the rainy traffic. We lost the package but gained a route. A black minivan with Yokohama plates was heading south, the same place Haruto had sent me to find Ogawa. Takeda stepped out of the sedan and took out his phone. He did not see our van behind the bus. Not yet. In a minute he would realize the pursuit had not been accidental. I turned into a narrow street and stopped beneath the awning of a closed workshop. Haruto's cloth amulet was still in my hand. Seki took small thread scissors from her bag. The seam was opened and sewn back up. Takeda wanted your brother to think the card had vanished. I carefully slit the lining. Inside lay a thin memory card wrapped in plastic and a slip of paper bearing a single word, Yamamoto. Haruto had even planned for this. If the card reached me, I was not supposed to race through the city with it. I was supposed to give it to the man capable of stopping the execution. I had no phone. Seki gave me an old flip phone. I dialed Yamamoto. Instead of the lawyer, a man's voice answered. "Is Mr. Mori already on his way?" the stranger asked. I disconnected without a word. The bait involving the blue folder had worked too well. Takeda had sent men to Yamamoto before he even left the prison. The lawyer was either hiding or lying on the floor of his own office. Seki said, "I have Naomi Ito's address. My nephew planned to contact her if the prosecutor's office closed the case. The journalist had already received my frame with the advertising screen. If Yamamoto was out of play, she was the one who could find him before Kuroda's men did." I tore off my prison jacket and threw it beneath the seat. The handcuffs remained on my wrists, a highly convincing accessory for a drive through Tokyo. Seki opened the driver's metal toolbox. Inside was a cutter for packing straps. It would not take the cuff lock. It might take the chain. The first 2 blows only scratched the metal. On the third, the chain snapped. The cuffs remained on my wrists, but at least I could hold the wheel now. We abandoned the van near a 24-hour clinic. The cameras would see 2 fugitives walking toward the subway. We went through the rear yard to find a taxi. I gave the address of the newsroom where Naomi worked. Seki shook her head. "Kuroda will check her workplace first." She was right. I remembered the signature beneath the email I had sent before my arrest. Naomi had asked for replies to go through a small bookstore in Jimbocho, where she met sources. The taxi driver watched my wrists in the mirror. I put my hands beneath Seki's coat and said I had been caught in an unfortunate fight on a film set. He did not believe me, but he received cash in advance and decided that someone else's drama was not worth a conversation with the police. Tokyo knows how to be discreet for the right price. The bookstore was nearly closed. An old man in a vest stood behind the counter collecting receipts. I said Naomi's name. He looked at my hands. "She said you'd come wet and stubborn," he answered. "She didn't say you'd be wearing handcuffs." I shrugged. The day became more eventful. The old man led us through the storeroom door. Naomi waited among boxes of magazines. Beside her, on a folding chair, sat Yamamoto with a split eyebrow. I exhaled for the first time since the chase. The lawyer was alive. He looked terrible, but for this night that already counted as good news. Yamamoto gave me an angry look. The blue folder? I lowered my eyes. I needed Takeda to divide his men. He pointed at the bandage above his eyebrow. He divided them. One came to me with a metal cane. I nodded. Apology after the trial. Naomi took the amulet and the card from me. "You can apologize later. Right now, let's find out what made your brother send half the city hunting." She took out an offline laptop and a small card reader. Smart woman. Even good news should not be opened on a machine connected to the internet. The card requested a password. A single field appeared on the screen, along with a hint. "The day you broke my nose." I almost laughed. I was 12. Haruto was 9. We fought over the last mochi at a summer festival. He lost the sweet and gained a crooked nose for a week. I entered the date in words, the way we had written it in our family album. The file opened, Naomi leaned closer, and Yamamoto stopped holding his eyebrow. The first item was the original parking lot video, not the murder, the moment before it. Shibata was getting out of the car alive, while Haruto handed him a folder. A minute later, a man in a cap entered the frame. He shoved Haruto aside, struck Shibata, and dragged him behind the car. Haruto ran after him. The fabricated version had cut off the beginning and the end. It kept the moment when Haruto picked up the dropped knife, turning an attempt to help into murder. I watched my brother on the screen. He was shouting to someone off camera to call an ambulance. His voice was quiet but real. Yamamoto closed his eyes. "This is enough for an emergency stay," he said. Naomi shook her head. "Only if we can prove the file existed before the trial." There was a second folder on the card. Photographs of Shibata's payment ledger. Transfers from a Kuroda subsidiary to an intermediary's account bearing Takeda's initials. Not a direct transfer, not Kuroda's signature written in blood. A chain that would have to be verified. Smart people soil their hands through gloves. The third file was a voice recording from Haruto. He spoke calmly, as though leaving instructions rather than a final message before his arrest. "If Akira has opened this, things have become worse. Don't trust one video. Find Miyuki Ogawa." She certified the payments and saw the original. The recording ended with the address of a workers' dormitory near Yokohama Port. Then my brother's voice grew quieter. "Akira, don't come for me without her." I closed the laptop. Naomi was watching me carefully. He expected to be imprisoned. I answered. He expected Takeda to come for everyone. Yamamoto was already printing a petition on a portable printer. With the card, I'll file the request now, but to make it certain, we need Ogawa or Shibata's authentic ledger. Seki repeated the port address aloud and turned pale. The minivan Takeda handed the package to was heading there. They know about Ogawa. We obtained proof of Haruto's innocence at the exact moment Kuroda gained the chance to remove the woman who could authenticate its origin. Naomi snapped her camera bag closed. I'm coming with you, Yamamoto objected. You are needed here to release the material if we're detained. She looked at him. The newsroom knows how to press a button without me, and witnesses talk more readily to someone who doesn't look like an escaped prisoner. That was difficult to argue with. I looked exactly like what I was. Seki found an old shopkeeper's coat in a box and draped it over my hands. Yamamoto handed me a copy of the petition. Before dawn, I'll reach the duty judge. But without Ogawa, Takeda will claim the card was planted. His phone rang. Fujita's name appeared on the screen. Yamamoto put it on speaker. The guard's voice sounded even, far too even. Takeda has returned, he said. He announced that Akira assaulted staff and stole physical evidence. Haruto is being transferred to an isolation block. I asked, is he alive? Fujita paused. Yes. He demanded a lawyer and refused to sign an assault report. They hit him for that. My chest tightened. Haruto was not merely waiting, he was resisting in full sight of people who could kill him under the guise of discipline. Fujita added, they want to carry out the execution at dawn, before the court opens. Takeda brought authorization from the ministry. Yamamoto went white. That is impossible without an additional procedure. Fujita answered, then come here and explain procedure to them through the bars. The connection died. Takeda had not fled with the evidence in panic. He had gone back to the prison and shut himself in beside a hostage. Another good move. I looked at the memory card in Naomi's hand. With it, we could prove innocence. Without a living Haruto, there would be no one left to prove it for. Seki said, go after Ogawa. I'll return to the prison and find Fujita. I turned to her. They'll detain you at the gate. She straightened. They killed my nephew. Your brother can still be pulled out. Don't waste time trying to protect an old woman from the right risk. Naomi gave her the newsroom's number and a small voice recorder. If Takeda violates procedure, record voices. Don't play hero. Just don't remain silent. Seki left through the bookstore's rear door. I watched her go and understood. With every step, my revenge was becoming smaller and other people's courage greater. Naomi and I drove to Yokohama in the newsroom car. Yamamoto stayed behind to file the petition and keep the original card in the bookstore safe. Takeda wanted me to carry the evidence personally and surrender it in exchange for my brother. Now he would have neither the card nor certainty about where it lay. Naomi drove fast but not recklessly. Tell me about Haruto. I looked out the window. He always stepped forward when he saw injustice. And you? She asked. I smiled faintly. I always pulled him back. She nodded toward the road. Today you'll have to do both jobs. Naomi's phone vibrated. The newsroom had received an official statement from the prosecutor's office. I had been declared a dangerous fugitive who assaulted an investigator. The statement alleged that I had stolen a fake memory card in order to obstruct the lawful execution of sentence. Takeda was building his defense before our publication. Naomi swore under her breath. If we release the video now, they'll call it an escaped prisoner's fabrication. I answered, then we release it together with Ogawa. Yokohama port greeted us with wet containers and empty roads. The workers' dormitory stood behind a refrigerated cargo warehouse. A fresh seal from the management company hung on the door to Ogawa's room. Not police, not court. Just a convenient piece of paper to stop anyone from asking questions. Naomi photographed the seal. I knocked. Silence. Then an elderly man looked out from the neighboring room and immediately tried to close his door. I placed my palm against the frame. Miyuki Ogawa is in danger. We're here because of Haruto Mori. My brother's name worked better than a threat, the man whispered. They took her away an hour ago. She shouted that she wouldn't sign a retraction. Black minivan, Yokohama plates. The same minivan Takeda had handed the package to. Kuroda had put the evidence and the witness in a single vehicle. Confident, almost too convenient. Naomi asked where the vehicle had gone. The old man pointed toward an old warehouse near the pier. Shibata's firm used to store documents there. Now it's empty. We ran back toward the car. At that moment, my phone, which Naomi had bought at a 24-hour shop, rang from an unknown number. I answered. At first I heard breathing, then Haruto's voice, hoarse and quiet. "Akira, don't trade the card for me. Do you hear me?" My feet stopped. "Where are you?" He coughed. Takeda handed me the phone. "He wants you to hear that I can still speak." The investigator's voice replaced his a second later. "Pier number 6. Bring the card and the journalist. Then your brother will live until court." He had found us faster than he should have, meaning he had either tracked Kuroda's minivan or Naomi was leading us straight into a prepared meeting. I looked at her. She understood from my face. "What?" I covered the microphone. "He named you. And Pier number 6. Naomi turned pale but did not look away. "My editor knows the route. I am not his person." I wanted to believe her. Trust was a luxury now. Takeda spoke again. "You have 20 minutes. After that, Ogawa will sign her retraction, and Haruto will cease to need a lawyer." The connection ended. In the distance between the containers, the headlights of a black minivan came on. It stood along the road leading to Pier number 6. Naomi took out her camera. I stopped her hand. "He's waiting for us there," she answered, "which is why he won't enjoy it if the meeting goes live." It was a bad plan. There was no other. Takeda still had Haruto. Kuroda still had Ogawa. We had a card we could not surrender. I opened the car door. "Yamamoto has the original. We'll take an empty copy with us." Naomi shook her head. "Takeda will check it in a minute." I looked at Haruto's amulet, still lying in my coat pocket. "Then we don't need a minute. We need a witness in front of the camera." We turned toward the pier. Rain struck the windshield. At the end of the road, a single warehouse was lit, and in front of it stood Takeda with a phone at his ear. Beside him, Kuroda's man held Miyuki Ogawa by the elbow. Her face was battered, but she stood straight, meaning she had not signed yet. Takeda saw me and gave a faint smile, not victorious, weary, like a man who also understood that now a single mistake would drown everyone. I stepped out of the car with the amulet in my hand. Naomi remained behind the wheel, her camera already running. "Release Ogawa, then we'll talk about the card." Takeda looked at the amulet. "You still think the rules are on your side?" I answered no. "Today you have too many witnesses." A faint tapping sounded from the speaker of his phone. 3 short knocks. Pause. 2. Haruto could hear our conversation and was speaking again through someone else's trap. I closed my hand around the amulet. My brother was alive. Ogawa was in front of me. Takeda held them both with one hand and thought I would bring him the truth in my palm. I took a step forward. Naomi turned on the transmission, and Kuroda's man pulled Ogawa toward the warehouse door. The next seconds would determine whom we lost first. I took another step toward Takeda. Rain flooded the pier, the warehouse lights trembled in the puddles, and in my palm lay the amulet with an empty memory card. Yamamoto already had the original. That protected the evidence, but not Haruto. Takeda only needed to understand the deception, and my brother might not live long enough to see court. Naomi remained in the car with the camera against her chest. The red light glowed beneath the collar of her coat. From outside, it looked like shivering from the cold. Miyuki Ogawa stood beside Kuroda's man. He held her not by the throat, but by the elbow. Politely. That was exactly why the grip looked more terrifying. Takeda extended his palm. "The amulet, then Ms. Ogawa will walk toward you." He did not promise freedom. He promised movement over a few steps. I held the cloth pouch higher. First, she tells the camera what she saw. Takeda looked at Naomi's car and gave a quiet smirk. "A live transmission from a port warehouse?" he asked. "The signal is weak here, and your editor will receive only a beautiful recording of your own mistake." Naomi's expression did not change, but I understood. He had checked the place in advance. This was not a random warehouse. This was a stage chosen by him. Ogawa suddenly said, "Don't give him anything." Shibata left more than one ledger. Kuroda's man tightened his grip on her arm, but she did not stop speaking. Takeda turned toward her. "Miyuki, do you still hope that a journalist will protect you from people who know your daughter's address?" Ogawa went pale. Not from a threat to herself. That was where Kuroda struck accurately. Not with a club, not with a shout, with the name of someone she loved. I said, "Touch her daughter," and this entire conversation becomes motive. Takeda looked at me wearily. Motive matters to people who live to reach a hearing. A faint noise came from the phone at his ear. I heard Haruto breathing. The investigator was keeping the line open so my brother could hear me choose. I gripped the amulet. "Haruto, don't listen to him." A hoarse laugh sounded from the speaker. "Too late. I've been listening to you my whole life." My lips twitched. Even beaten and locked away, he managed to sound irritatingly alive. Takeda noticed my reaction and frowned. "The card," he repeated. "Or your brother will be taken to the execution chamber before the lawyer finds the duty judge." I did not know whether he was bluffing. That was his strength. A smart enemy does not have to carry out every threat. It is enough that you are afraid to test him. I threw the amulet onto the wet concrete between us. Not to him, to the middle. Ogawa walks first. Then you pick up the thing you killed Shibata for. Takeda nodded to Kuroda's man. The man pushed Ogawa forward. She took one step, a second, a third. Then he abruptly stopped her by the collar of her coat. "Now the journalist gets out of the car," Takeda said. Naomi opened the door, raising her empty hands. The camera beneath her coat continued watching them. She said, "An investigator from the prosecutor's office is holding a witness at the pier. Identify yourself for the recording." Takeda did not even turn his head. "Ms. Ito, do you know the difference between a recording and evidence?" he asked. "I know the difference between an investigator and a kidnapper." Kuroda's man bent down for the amulet. At that moment, Ogawa stamped on his foot and lunged toward me. He caught her by the sleeve. The fabric tore. Ogawa fell to her knees in the middle of the pier. I stepped toward her, but Takeda had already picked up the amulet and moved back toward the warehouse door. He ripped the seam with his fingernail and pulled out the card. Nothing changed in his face. I assume the original is currently with the lawyer. He did not insert the card into a device and waste a minute. He understood at once. That was why I hated him more than the man with fists. Takeda raised the phone. "Did you hear that, Haruto? Your brother came with an empty toy." A cough sounded from the speaker, then my brother's voice. "Then why are you still bargaining?" Haruto asked. I smiled involuntarily. Takeda fell silent. My younger brother had struck more accurately than I had. Ogawa rose from the concrete and shouted into Naomi's camera. "I certified Kuroda's payments." Takeda took the original after Shibata was murdered. Kuroda's man grabbed her by the hair and dragged her toward the warehouse. Naomi stepped fully out of the car. "The recording has gone to the newsroom," she said. Takeda looked at her with irritation for the first time. "No, there is no signal." Naomi shrugged. "There is a send command as soon as one appears." It might have been true or a bluff. Takeda did not know. Finally, he tasted his own game, where every option was dangerous. He shoved Ogawa inside the warehouse. Kuroda's man took a folding knife from his pocket and stood at the door, not a gunman. This way was quieter and dirtier. Takeda said into the phone, "Prepare Haruto's transfer." Then he put the device in his pocket. My brother vanished from the conversation, and the air became colder than the rain. I charged the door. Kuroda's man met me with his shoulder in my chest. We slammed against wet metal, and the pain in my stomach flared again. He was heavier and knew how to fight. I knew only how not to stop. I seized his knife wrist and took an elbow to the cheekbone. Naomi did not scream. She activated the car's alarm and aimed its headlights directly at the door. Kuroda's man jerked toward the light for only a second. That second was enough. From inside, Ogawa shoved the warehouse door with a cart. The door struck the man in the back and the knife slid into a puddle. I hit him neither elegantly nor intelligently. Just with my knee where any man stops thinking about contracts. He doubled over. The three of us stumbled into the warehouse. Takeda was already standing by a table holding a statement form. Beside it, a young notarial clerk trembled. On the sheet, Ogawa was supposed to admit that she had created the payment photographs herself after Haruto's arrest. Kuroda was not preparing a disappearance. He was preparing a version of events. Takeda took the clerk by the shoulder. "Certify her signature, and you leave." The young man looked at Ogawa's battered face and lowered his pen. "I can't," he whispered. Takeda did not strike him. He only took out his phone and spoke a surname. The young man turned paler than Ogawa. That was how Kuroda operated. For every person, he had not a bullet but a loved one, a debt, or a job they were terrified to lose. Ogawa snatched the form off the table and tore it in half. "Shibata died because he believed in procedure. I am not signing anything else for you." Takeda seized her arm. I lunged forward, but the man by the door managed to rise and threw himself onto me from behind. Naomi struck him in the temple with her camera. The camera cracked and fell to the concrete. She looked at the wreckage and said, "My editor is going to kill me." I broke free and shoved Takeda away from Ogawa. He backed toward the shelves, but he already held the package marked with Shibata's case in his hand. "You need this chain of payments?" he asked. "Then move away from the door." He was not frightening us. He was bargaining for an exit. Ogawa grabbed my sleeve. "That package isn't the original," she whispered. "Shibata left the original ledger in a bank safe deposit box." I looked at her. Takeda could not hear over the alarm outside. For the first time, the package in his hand stopped being the only door to the truth. I said loudly, "Take it and leave." Takeda narrowed his eyes. He understood people too well to believe in sudden surrender. "What did she say?" he asked. I shrugged. "That you're a pathetic man." Honestly, I understood that even without a translation. Kuroda's man rose again. Blood ran down his cheek. He wanted to come at me, but Takeda's phone rang first. Takeda answered with one word, "Yes." The voice on the line was quiet, but in the empty warehouse I heard every phrase. "Don't create another corpse near cameras," the man said. "Get the ledger's location. After that, the girl and the fugitive don't matter." It was Kuroda. Not a shouting master in a tower, a calm man who spoke of death as an unnecessary expense line. Takeda looked at Ogawa. "Mr. Kuroda is offering safety for your daughter. He needs only the address of the bank vault." Ogawa laughed, short and painful. "He already killed my supervisor." From what moment did his promises become insurance? There was a pause on the line. Then Kuroda said, "From the moment your daughter boarded the train home." Ogawa lost all color in her face. Naomi lifted the broken camera. I recorded the voice. Kuroda heard her and calmly answered, "Then keep the recording safe, it will be your last." The call ended. For a second, even Takeda looked as though he had understood. To Kuroda, he too was merely a man whose usefulness was expiring. Ogawa whispered, "My daughter arrives at Sakuragacho in 20 minutes. Now we had another timer. Kuroda loved clocks no less than Takeda did. I said, "The location of the ledger in exchange for her daughter's safety." Takeda smirked. "You're offering me something you don't have, but you don't have time to determine that," I answered. "Kuroda won't forgive you if his voice goes on air and Ogawa's daughter reaches the police." Takeda glanced at his phone. For the first time he found himself caught between his master's order and the risk of becoming the first person his master sacrificed. Kuroda's man stepped toward Ogawa. Takeda unexpectedly stopped him with a hand. "Not now." The man looked at him with open contempt. The crack was small, but real. Kuroda trusted his enforcer more than a corrupt investigator. Takeda had already felt it. Voices sounded outside. Naomi smiled through the blood on her lip. The newsroom didn't receive the broadcast, but it did receive my message about the pier. 2 port guards and a photographer from her newspaper were running toward the warehouse. Not police, not rescue, just witnesses Takeda had not ordered. Kuroda's man rushed for the back door. Takeda seized Shibata's package and retreated after him. He was not choosing victory. He was choosing not to be filmed beside Ogawa. I started after him, but Ogawa cried out. She staggered, clutching her ribs. Running after the package meant leaving her on the floor. I stopped. Takeda saw my choice through the open door. His gaze said one thing: he had known I would stop. The black minivan tore away behind the warehouse. The package left with it. I knelt beside Ogawa and for the first time felt as though I had lost. She seized my coat. "Don't look at the car. Listen. The ledger is in a bank safe deposit box near Sakuragacho station. My daughter has the key." I leaned closer. "Kuroda is already going after her." Ogawa nodded through the pain. "Which is why you need to get there before his promises do." Naomi dropped to her knees on the other side and pressed a handkerchief to Ogawa's side. "An ambulance is coming. I called it before I got out of the car." The photographer was taking pictures of the torn form, the knife on the floor, and the blood by the table. Takeda had left with the package, but he had left behind too much he had never planned to leave. My new phone vibrated. Yamamoto spoke quickly. "I filed the petition. The duty judge has agreed to review it at dawn." I asked, "Has the execution been stopped?" A pause answered me, "Not yet. We need Ogawa, the card, and confirmation of the payment ledger's origin." I looked at the woman on the floor. She heard the conversation and said, "I will go." Naomi shook her head. "You can barely breathe." Ogawa squeezed her hand. "If I don't appear, Haruto will die as a properly documented murderer." I already kept silent too long once. Yamamoto continued, "There is another problem. Fujita reports that Haruto was removed from his cell. The log records it as a medical transfer." My fingers went cold. "Where?" The lawyer exhaled. "No one is saying." Fujita tried to stop the escort. He was suspended. Takeda had not merely threatened a transfer. He had removed Haruto from the place where Seki and Fujita could see procedure. Now my brother had disappeared inside the system. Ogawa closed her eyes for a second, then opened them. "First my daughter and the ledger. Without it, you'll find your brother, but you won't give him his name back." I wanted to argue. I wanted to run back to the prison walls and break every door. Instead, I took the keys to Naomi's car. Naomi told the photographer to ride with the ambulance and keep copies of the images separately. Then she sat beside me. Sakuragacho, we have less than 20 minutes. We left Ogawa beneath the ambulance siren. I did not tell her to hold on. People who tell the truth while their daughters are threatened are already holding on more firmly than I am. The road to the station stretched past wet warehouses. Naomi checked messages from the newsroom. The Kuroda recording is damaged, but Takeda's voice can be heard clearly. Enough for an article, I said. She nodded. For court, we need a living witness and the ledger. I hate it when the lawyers write. At the entrance to Sakuragacho Station, a crowd poured out from a late train. I searched for a woman who looked like Ogawa, while Kuroda's people were already searching too. 2 men in matching coats stood by the ticket machines. Not station security, too attentive to faces, too indifferent to schedules. Naomi showed me a photo of Ogawa's daughter sent from her mother's old phone. A girl in a white scarf with a red suitcase. I saw the scarf on the platform stairs. A man in a coat was already beside the girl, saying something in a calm, almost polite voice. I walked toward them without quickening my pace. A fugitive with metal cuffs on his wrists should not attract station security before saving a witness. The man offered the girl a phone. Kuroda might have been on the line, or perhaps it was a recording of her mother's voice. She went pale and took hold of her suitcase handle. I reached them and said, "Miyuki asked you not to get into any car." The girl looked at my wrists and stepped away from both of us. The man in the coat smiled. "He is an escaped criminal. Your mother is under our protection." Naomi approached from the other side and raised her press ID. "Does your protection always begin with kidnapping?" she asked. Passengers around us began turning to look. The man stopped smiling. He grabbed the girl by the elbow. I struck his forearm with the metal cuff on my wrist. Not heroically, but he let her go. The second man rushed over from the ticket machines. Naomi shouted, "Security! Kidnapping!" In a station, that word worked better than any family secret. Station staff ran toward us. Kuroda's men did not fight in front of the crowd. One shoved me into a pillar and both disappeared into the passageway. The girl trembled and did not release her suitcase. "Where is my mother?" I answered honestly. "In an ambulance, alive. And she sent us for the key." Her name was Yui. She did not cry. She only took a small brass key from an inside pocket and squeezed it until her fingers turned white. Mom said to give it to Haruto if anything happened to her. I looked at the key. Even Ogawa had entrusted the truth to my brother before she trusted me. The safe deposit boxes were in a building across the street. Night access required the client's card and the key. Yui took the card from her wallet. Naomi called Yamamoto and put him on speaker. We found the daughter and the key. The lawyer exhaled. "Get the ledger and go to the court. Immediately." I asked about Haruto. Yamamoto was silent for a moment. Fujita managed to send only a van number. The vehicle left through the side gates 10 minutes ago. My brother had already been taken out of the prison, not officially for execution, in a medical van that could disappear between any 2 signatures. Yui opened the box. Inside lay a sealed envelope bearing the bank's seal, Shibata's official ledger, and a letter addressed to Haruto Mori. I took the envelope, but left the letter with her. Yui shook her head. "Mom said it has to reach his hands." Naomi's phone rang. This time, the number belonged to Fujita. His voice sounded heavy, as if he were speaking while lying on the floor. "I saw the route," he said. "The van didn't go to the execution site. It turned onto the old road toward Kuroda's private clinic in Shinagawa. Takeda was removing my brother from a state prison under the guise of medical care, not to execute him faster. To make Haruto disappear before the court session." Fujita coughed. "Haruto left a note on the gurney. One word, court. Even now, he was demanding that I carry the evidence, not myself, to him." I closed my eyes. I had the ledger. The court was waiting at dawn. Haruto was on his way to people who could not be left alone with him for even a minute. Naomi looked at the time. We split up. Yui and I take the ledger to Yamamoto. "You go after Haruto and do something stupid again." I wanted to object. She pushed the keys into my hand. "Don't waste a minute. Your brother is already tired of proving he's smarter than you." Yui handed me the letter for Haruto. "Bring him back to my mother alive." I put the envelope beneath my shirt. "I'll bring them both back." I ran out of the bank into the rain. Naomi had the ledger, the witness, and a path to the judge. I had a clinic address and a promise I had been making all my life. The car tore away from the curb. In the mirror, Sakuragacho Station vanished behind the wet lights. Ahead lay Shinagawa, and the van carrying my brother into darkness. It was less than 20 minutes to Shinagawa if the road was clear. At night, the road was not clear. Rain, traffic lights, and other people's headlights were all working for Takeda. I drove Naomi's car with one hand. With the other, I pressed Yui's letter for Haruto against my chest. The small envelope weighed more than any weapon. The phone on the seat rang 3 blocks later. Yamamoto spoke in a whisper, but I heard not fear in his voice, the anger of a man being prevented from doing his work. The judge has accepted the petition, he said. The hearing will begin at dawn. The card and ledger have been registered, but the prosecutor's office is demanding Haruto himself. I struck the steering wheel with my palm. Takeda's men took him out. Yamamoto answered, which is exactly why we need him alive, before the judge, not in a death report. Naomi joined the call on speaker. I'm bringing Yui and the ledger. Ogawa will arrive with the ambulance. You keep the judge in that courtroom, even if you have to lie down in the doorway, the lawyer exhaled. I will. Akira, don't try to wage war on a clinic alone. I looked at the rain-slick road. I'm going to retrieve my brother, not the clinic. The call ended, a good line on my part, almost convincing. The problem was that Kuroda's people were certainly waiting for me. The private Siren clinic stood behind a quiet street lined with plane trees. Glass facade, soft light, a sign advertising rehabilitation after serious illness. No bars, no guards with batons, only a parking lot, a service ramp, and 2 cameras by the entrance. This is how wealthy people conceal dirty work. On the side road, I saw the medical van from Fujita's message. Its doors were open. Inside lay stretcher straps and a fresh drop of blood. I touched the drop with my finger, still wet. Haruto had been brought in recently, meaning he was either inside already or Takeda had left me far too obvious a lure. A plastic patient wristband lay on the driver's seat. It bore someone else's name, but beneath the barcode, Haruto had scratched 2 letters with his nail, YUI. He knew I would find the van, and he was reminding me not to run to him empty-handed. My younger brother continued issuing orders even through a piece of plastic. I put the wristband in my pocket and circled the clinic from the rear. An orderly in blue scrubs was smoking by the ramp. He looked at the entrance more often than at his cigarette. I approached, limping more than the pain required. My brother was admitted after an accident. They transferred him tonight. Mori Haruto. The orderly froze, then tapped away ash. There is no patient here by that name. I showed him the wristband, because you registered him under someone else's. He quickly glanced at the cameras. Leave. I didn't see his face. I only helped lift the stretcher. A man in a suit said the patient was dangerous. I asked, was he conscious? The orderly crushed his cigarette down to the filter. Yes. He demanded a lawyer. Then he spat in your man's face. A laugh escaped me. Bad timing. Inappropriate. But for the first time that night, I could clearly see Haruto alive, rather than as a name on a court document. The orderly said more quietly, they took him to the 4th floor, to a locked room. Before that, he dropped this beneath the stretcher. He handed me a piece of gauze. Written on the cloth in blood were the words, not elevator, stairs B. My brother was leaving me a root in his own blood. After that, complaining about exhaustion would have been shameful. I asked the orderly why he was helping me. He looked at the wet pavement, because patients are not normally brought in tied down with a prosecutor in the vehicle. The staff entrance opened with a card. The orderly swiped his and turned away as though he were merely finishing his cigarette. I entered into the smell of medicine and floors that were too clean. In the lobby, a night nurse was paging through the admissions log. I hid the metal cuffs beneath my coat sleeves and headed not for the elevator, but for stairwell B. Behind the stairwell door, it was darker than in the corridor. 4 floors upward. My ribs hurt with every breath, but Haruto had already paid more. On the 2nd floor landing, I heard footsteps below. 2 men entered the stairs through the ramp door. One said, he's here already. Takeda was right. I sped up, not heroically, nearly falling on the stairs. A man with bruises and a broken chain does not look elegant, even when saving his brother. The door on the 3rd floor was card-locked. The 4th floor door was open, not a gift. Either they were waiting for me there, or they were too confident anyone would reach it. The corridor in the locked wing was empty. A nurse was on duty behind the glass station, and beside her stood one of Kuroda's men with a folder tucked under his arm. I hid behind a linen cabinet. On the door of the room at the end of the corridor was a plaque bearing someone else's surname. Beneath it, Haruto had scratched the letter M with his nail. The nurse said to the man with the folder, "The patient is refusing the sedative." He answered, "Then record that he refused treatment." "He is demanding a lawyer," she said. The man smiled. The patient is confused. Record that too. The clinic was already constructing their alibi. I needed to get past the station without a fight. I took a laundry bag from the cabinet, put on a mask I found on top, and walked toward the utility room. The nurse raised her eyes. "Are you with the night shift?" Without stopping, I answered, "The ramp is flooded. They told me to collect the wet sheets from the 4th floor." Kuroda's man looked at my hands. The metal cuff on my wrist flashed beneath my sleeve. He pushed away from the counter, and the game ended. I threw the bag into his face and rushed toward the room. The nurse screamed, but did not call security. She pressed the medical emergency button. Smart woman. The room door had been locked from the outside with an ordinary key. Kuroda's man had already torn the bag off his head. I rammed the door with my shoulder. The lock held. Haruto's voice came from inside. "Akira? Seriously? I wrote court, not come here alone." Even through a door, he knew how to ruin a beautiful moment. I struck it again. Kuroda's man grabbed my collar and slammed me into the wall. Light burst before my eyes. My legs nearly failed. The nurse suddenly brought a metal tray down across his arm. "In my ward, patients are not locked in without a doctor's order," she said. He shoved her away, but it was enough. I tore the key from his pocket, opened the door, and stumbled inside with pain in every rib. Haruto was sitting on the bed in a hospital gown. One wrist was strapped to the bed rail. There was blood on his lip. His eyes were angry and alive. "You look disgusting," he said. I pulled the strap out of the lock with the key. "Don't repeat my best lines on the day I rescue you." He stood and immediately swayed. I caught him beneath the shoulder. Haruto whispered angrily, "Don't carry me. Give me your arm. I can still walk." There he was. Not cargo. Not a reason for a beautiful death. My younger brother, who would rather fall on his own than allow himself to be carried out like an object. In the corridor, Kuroda's man was already on his feet. The nurse locked the station door and shouted into the phone about an unlawfully detained patient. Haruto pointed to the bedside table. "Take the folder." Beneath a glass of water lay a copy of the transfer order bearing Takeda's signature. I seized the sheet. In it, Haruto was described as an unidentified detainee suffering a psychotic episode. If he died, my brother's name would never appear anywhere. Haruto smirked through the pain. I stole a copy while they argued about how much sedative to inject into me. "Do you still think you're the only one who knows how to save people?" I wanted to answer. Kuroda's man kicked the door open. Not a time for a family confession. Haruto snatched the metal IV stand from its holder. He did not strike the man. He simply jammed the stand between the door and the wall, blocking the passage for seconds. "Stairwell B," he said. I wrote it down. We left through the second door of the room into a treatment room. Haruto knew the floor plan better than I did because he had listened to the nurses talking while I was driving. Beyond the treatment room was a corridor leading to the fire stairs. The door opened, and Takeda stood before us, alone, without his coat, a gun in his hand. He held the weapon low, without theatrics. "Mori, step away from your brother," Haruto snorted. "Which one? You've arrested both of us today without a report." Takeda shifted his gaze to the copy of the transfer order in my hand. "That sheet proves nothing," I answered. "Then it's strange you brought a gun for it personally." He looked tired. Wet hair clung to his forehead. For the first time, Takeda looked not like a machine of the system, but like a man running out of options. "Kuroda will not save you now," I said. His voice was heard at the pier. "Ogawa is alive. The ledger is with the lawyer. You are the only face left on every piece of paper." Takeda did not flinch, but the pistol lowered by a centimeter. Haruto noticed before I did. He said, "He can't kill me, then everything stays on him." The investigator looked at my brother. "You're too intelligent for a junior accountant." Haruto smiled. "And you're too stupid for a man who sold verdicts." The gun rose again, not toward Haruto, toward me. Takeda could still remove the fugitive and call the death resistance during arrest. Below, an ambulance siren wailed. Then another. The nurse had called more than the administration. The clinic now had witnesses outside. Takeda said, "You will not leave this place before dawn." Haruto whispered to me, "Fire cabinet on the left. Red button unlocks the doors during evacuation." I shook my head. "There are patients." He answered, "Not the alarm, the release." I saw the nurse testing it before her shift. My younger brother was not suggesting chaos. He had found the standard exit. Unlike me, he could still think next to a gun. I threw the folder onto the floor. Takeda's eyes twitched toward it. Haruto stepped sideways and smashed the glass of the fire cabinet with his elbow. No alarm screamed. The magnetic locks on the staircases simply clicked open. The nurse had not been lying when she said the clinic was required to leave exits available to patients. We lunged for the door. Takeda fired not at us but at the handle. The bullet struck metal, the door slammed against the frame, but Haruto had already wedged his shoulder into it. He cried out. I pushed the door with him. We tumbled onto the stairs and ran downward, while above us Takeda shouted to block the ramp. Haruto descended the first 2 flights on his own. On the third his legs folded. I caught him, and this time he did not argue. That frightened me more than the gun, he whispered. They did give me something before the transfer. I swore. Why didn't you say so? He smirked. You were already nervous enough. The second-floor door flew open. The orderly from the ramp and the night nurse stood in front of us. She held the keys to the service elevator. They're waiting for you downstairs, she said. The elevator goes to sterilization, then to loading. I saw nothing except an unlawfully held patient. I wanted to thank her. She looked at Haruto. Thank me in court. Name the clinic, and tell them who brought him in restrained. We entered the elevator. Haruto leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. I patted his cheek. Don't fall asleep, he muttered. Then say something more interesting. I took Yui's letter from beneath my shirt. I have something from Ogawa's daughter. His eyes opened immediately. Is Miyuki alive? Real panic appeared in his voice. Alive? Yui too? The ledger is already on its way to the judge. Haruto exhaled as though only now had he allowed himself to feel his own pain. He took the letter but did not open it. He pressed it to his chest. Shibata asked me to protect them. I failed. I said, you did more than all the investigators combined. The elevator stopped in the basement. The doors opened into a sterilization area. Beyond the glass stood carts, gowns, and 2 staff members staring at the floor. One of them tossed me a white coat. The other covered Haruto with a sheet on a stretcher. Kuroda's clinic turned out to be full of people whose consciences he had not paid for. I wheeled my brother through the corridor, pretending to be an orderly. An oxygen mask hid his face. He said quietly, "This is humiliating." I leaned toward him. "Would you rather run yourself?" Haruto thought for a second. "No, but write in the report that I looked heroic." At the loading door, an administrator in an expensive suit stopped us. Not a doctor, not a guard, a man who knew who owned the building. "Return the stretcher to the ward," he said. I showed him a blank sheet from the folder. Emergency transfer by order of the prosecutor's office. He extended a hand for the document. Haruto suddenly began thrashing beneath the sheet and wheezing. The administrator jumped back, afraid not of the patient but of liability. I shouted, "He's stopping breathing." The orderly from the ramp flung open the loading door. A medicine delivery vehicle stood in front of us. We had nearly made it. Nearly is always the most dangerous word. A black sedan appeared at the basement exit, blocking the ramp. The man who stepped out was not Takeda. He was tall, in a dark overcoat, with silver hair and a face I had seen in the business news. Kuroda had come himself, not for the card. The original was already heading to court. He had come to look into the face of the man who could destroy his name. Haruto tore off the mask and painfully propped himself up on the stretcher. Finally, he said, "I wanted to know whether a coward looks just as expensive in person." Kuroda was not offended. He merely looked at him like an error in a report. "Mr. Mori, you should have accepted a convenient guilt and preserved the others." Haruto tightened his grip on Yui's letter. Was Shibata supposed to stay silent too? Kuroda answered calmly. Shibata confused honesty with influence. I stepped in front of the stretcher. "Move aside." Kuroda shifted his eyes to me. The older brother, the engineer, the man who ruins lives for the sake of one relative. "No," Haruto said behind me. "You ruined a life for the sake of one payment ledger. Don't pretend we're alike." For a second, Kuroda stopped smiling. That was a true blow. Not my fist, not the card, the voice of the man he had already buried. This is why
Haruto is needed in this story, not as a victim. Akira reached the clinic for his brother, but it is Haruto who forces Kuroda to speak. Saving a body is not enough.
a living man must reclaim his own voice before the people who stole his name. Kuroda raised his phone. "I am one call away from the judge seeing a statement that Ogawa testified under pressure from a fugitive." I answered, "Make the call. Naomi will record that too." He smirked. "The journalist is currently traveling a route my people know better than she does." I felt Haruto tense on the stretcher. The ledger and Yui were heading straight to court. Kuroda was not blocking us. He was delaying us while they were caught. Haruto thrust the letter at me. "Yui's number is in there. Call now." I dialed without taking my eyes off Kuroda. One ring, a second, then silence. Kuroda's smile widened slightly. At that exact second, Naomi picked up. A siren wailed in the background. We're safe. Your friends drive worse than they threaten. I exhaled. Kuroda's expression did not change, but his hand holding the phone lowered. He had just been denied another clean solution. Naomi said, "We're at the courthouse entrance." Ogawa arrived in a second ambulance. Yamamoto demands Haruto by video link or in person within 20 minutes. I looked at Kuroda. You heard her. He put the phone into his pocket. Then go. The more you say in court, the easier it will be to prove your conspiracy. A smart move. He could no longer remove us quietly, so he intended to turn the escape, the witnesses, and the pressure into a story about a conspiracy against his corporation. I pushed the stretcher toward the vehicle. Kuroda did not stop me. His people stepped aside. That frightened me more than if they had struck us, Haruto whispered. He has prepared something. I nodded. I know. My brother looked at the letter in his hands. Then it's good that we aren't empty-handed either. The orderly helped load the stretcher. The nurse handed me a certified copy of the admission record. It bore a time, someone else's name, and the signature of Takeda's man. For court, she said. I took the sheet. You'll have to testify. She straightened. I already decided that when I saw the straps on his hands. I closed the vehicle doors and sat behind the wheel. Haruto lay in the back, pale and stubborn. In the mirror, Kuroda stood in the rain without attempting to follow us. The engine started on the second attempt. I drove out from the ramp, and the clinic vanished behind a turn. We had 20 minutes to reach court and far too many enemies without handcuffs. Haruto raised his head. Akira, I looked in the mirror. What? He smiled weakly. Thank you for not listening to me after all. I wanted to answer sharply. I could not. My throat tightened more than my hands on the wheel. Next time, try asking for help normally. He closed his eyes. There won't be a next time. I pressed the accelerator. For the first time that night, I believed he might be right. The vehicle shot onto the road toward Kasumigaseki, while Haruto lay in the back seat trying not to close his eyes. After the clinic, silence frightened me more than a pursuit. Every few seconds I looked in the mirror. His face was gray, his lips split, but his fingers still gripped Yui's letter as though it kept him conscious. Open it, I said. Haruto shook his head. It's for court, I answered. You need to live until court. Maybe it tells you how to do that. He gave a weak snort and tore the edge of the envelope. Inside was a short note from Ogawa and a safe deposit receipt bearing the seal, date, and Shibata's signature. Haruto read the first lines and closed his eyes. She kept everything. I asked, exactly what? He extended the receipt to me with a trembling hand. Shibata had deposited the payment ledger 2 days before his murder. The witnesses to its storage were Ogawa and Haruto. Their names stood beside the bank seal. That changed everything. Kuroda could call the card a fabrication. He could call me a fugitive. But the ledger had been in the bank before Shibata died and before my brother was arrested. I called Naomi on speaker. She answered immediately. In the background, Yui was arguing with someone at the courthouse entrance, while Yamamoto demanded that the duty courtroom be opened. Do not open the envelope containing the ledger, I said. There is a bank receipt in the letter. Shibata registered the deposit in the presence of Haruto and Ogawa. Naomi exhaled. Excellent. Now the bad news. The ambulance carrying Ogawa never arrived. The hospital says it was rerouted by order of the Kuroda Fund. Haruto abruptly lifted himself and immediately clutched his side. Is she alive? Naomi was silent for a second. No one confirms it. Yui doesn't know yet. I tightened my hands on the wheel until my fingers hurt. Kuroda had lost at the pier, but not the witness. As long as Ogawa was missing, he could claim the ledger had been stolen by her daughter. Haruto pressed the letter to his chest. Don't tell Yui until we know. I looked at him in the mirror. He had become an adult in the most wrong room in the world. You don't have to be strong right now, I said. He smirked. And you don't have to say stupid things, but we're both trying to break old habits. Press vehicles were already standing in front of the courthouse. Naomi had managed to send enough to the newsroom that the night was no longer a quiet internal procedure. I pulled up to the service entrance. Yamamoto was waiting at the doors with 2 courthouse security officers. One already held handcuffs in his hand. The lawyer opened the rear door and saw Haruto. For a second, his face lost its professional fatigue. My God, you really are alive. Haruto tried to get out by himself. His legs failed on the first step. I caught him, and he whispered, "Don't tell anyone about this part." The security officer looked at the cuffs on my wrists. Akira Mori, you are wanted. I extended my hands. Record that I came voluntarily. Yamamoto stepped between us. He delivered a condemned prisoner who was unlawfully removed from detention. The judge first, your reports afterward. The guard hesitated only briefly. He placed new handcuffs on me but did not take me away. You are going into the courtroom under my responsibility. No sudden movements. My sudden movements ended at the clinic, I said. Haruto quietly added, don't believe him. He lies even when he's trying to sound funny. They led us through a side corridor into a waiting room. The court's duty doctor examined Haruto and immediately demanded that the marks from straps and injections be documented. The doctor asked whether he had consented to treatment. Haruto raised his bruised sleeve. They transported me under someone else's name. Presumably the consent belonged to someone else too. Yui entered the room. She saw Haruto on the examination couch and stopped, as though afraid any movement would destroy the thing her mother had risked everything for. Haruto attempted to stand. Yui approached first and placed the second half of the letter in his hand. Mom said to give it only to you. He read in silence. Then he looked at me. The ledger contains an insert bearing Takeda's signature. He personally received a copy of the payments from Shibata a week before the murder. Yamamoto straightened sharply. Why didn't Ogawa give this earlier? Yui tightened her grip on her bag strap. She was afraid. Then Haruto was arrested and it became too late. Haruto did not accuse her. Not too late. As long as I'm here, it isn't too late. Yui turned away to cry without witnesses. I pretended to look at the door. The door opened on its own. Naomi entered with wet hair and a folder in her hands. The newsroom releases the story after the hearing begins, not before. I asked, why? She looked at Haruto. Because Kuroda has already stated that a fugitive kidnapped a condemned prisoner and manufactured evidence. He was not hiding. He had entered the public arena first and declared us criminals before the court heard a single word from Ogawa. Haruto handed Naomi the letter. Then show them that a fugitive could not forge a bank seal while locked in someone else's hospital room. Naomi smiled at him for the first time. Now I understand why your brother always looks offended. You steal all the best lines. People in expensive suits appeared in the corridor. Leading them was Kuroda's lawyer Shindo. Behind him came Kuroda himself, dry, calm, with no rain left on his coat. He saw Haruto on the examination couch and tilted his head slightly. No surprise. That meant the clinic had not been the final plan, merely one of the options. Shindo handed the court clerk a thick folder. The corporation petitions to participate as the injured party in a case of extortion and defamation. Yamamoto laughed without joy. They kidnapped a witness, and now they're offended. Shindo answered, prove the first. The second has already been published. Kuroda passed us and stopped in front of Haruto. You should have stayed in the ward. You look ill. My brother slowly sat straighter. And you should have stayed in the news about philanthropy, he said. In person, it's easier to see how many people you're hiding behind. Kuroda gave the faintest smile. And yet today, the court will decide, not the sharpness of your pain. Then he walked into the courtroom without waiting for an answer. Haruto looked at me. I hate him. I nodded. A healthy reaction. The doctor should record it as a sign of clear consciousness. The clerk announced the beginning of the emergency hearing. They left me in handcuffs. Haruto was seated in a chair beside Yamamoto. Yui and Naomi took witness seats. The courtroom was small. No public. Only Judge Kanda, the clerk, court security, and several journalists admitted after Naomi's statement. The judge looked at the clock. The execution is scheduled in less than 2 hours. I will not listen to speeches about reputation, only facts and the source of every document. Yamamoto rose first. He placed before the judge the memory card, Shibata's sealed ledger, and the bank receipt Haruto had received from Yui. My client was sentenced on the basis of an edited video. The original recording and the payment ledger were concealed by investigator Takeda. Shindo rose calmly. The card appeared in the convicted man's brother's possession after an escape from custody. The ledger was removed by the daughter of a missing witness. The chain of custody is broken. He was not denying the contents. He was attacking their origin. Smart. If the evidence was declared tainted, the truth would remain true only outside the sentence. The judge asked, "Where is investigator Takeda?" Shindo folded his hands. To my knowledge, he is carrying out official duties following Mr. Mori's assault. I felt Haruto tense. Takeda had not come to court. He remained wherever he held Ogawa, or the documents he could still destroy. Naomi handed the clerk a copy of the recording from the pier. Shindo did not even look at it. Incomplete audio, captured by a participant in an unlawful interference. The judge played a short fragment. Ogawa's voice sounded through the courtroom. She had certified Kuroda's payments, and Takeda had taken the original after Shibata's death. Then Kuroda's voice could be heard, too fragmentary to identify every sentence. He sat motionless, a man accustomed to poor recordings. Shindo said, "Ms. Ogawa is absent. We do not know her condition or under whose pressure she spoke those words." Yui jumped up. "Your people took my mother away?" the judge said sharply. "Sit down. You will be given the floor." Yui sat, gripping the safe deposit key in her fist. Yamamoto showed the bank receipt. The ledger had been in the safe deposit box since before the murder. "Access tonight is confirmed by the bank's system." Shindo turned to him. "Does it confirm that the ledger was not replaced before deposit? Witness Ogawa is absent. Mr. Haruto is the accused." He struck where it hurt most. In this room, Haruto's words still weighed less because someone else's lie had already received a verdict. The judge looked at my brother. "Mr. Mori, can you speak?" Haruto slowly stood, leaning on the table rather than on my hand. "I can, and I will speak for myself." His voice shook only at the beginning. "I worked for Shibata. I made a copy of the video, and I saw the ledger before his death." Shindo raised a hand. "The convicted man has an interest in the outcome." Haruto looked at him. "Excellent observation. I am scheduled to be executed in 2 hours." Someone in the courtroom inhaled sharply. The judge did not smile but allowed him to continue. Haruto took out Yui's letter and spread it before him. Shibata feared the payment ledger would disappear. He left an insert in the bank envelope with the number of the copy Takeda received. For the first time, Shindo flipped through his folder too quickly. Kuroda remained still, but his gaze shifted from my brother to the envelope. Yui passed the clerk a small folded sheet. On it were an issue number, Shibata's personal seal, and the recipient's signature, Ryo Takeda. Yamamoto said, "Query the bank." The number was registered before the murder. If the insert is authentic, the investigator received a copy of the ledger before Haruto's arrest. The judge immediately ordered the clerk to contact the branch's night manager. Shindo requested a recess. The judge refused. Kuroda finally spoke for himself. "My lawyer was not notified of this document." The judge looked at him. "Neither was the court. That is precisely why we are here." Haruto sat, almost collapsing into the chair. "I wanted to approach, but a guard restrained me by the shoulder." My brother saw and whispered, "Don't ruin the moment by getting arrested for fighting." Several minutes later, the clerk returned with confirmation. Yui had opened the box for the first time since the ledger was deposited. The bank had registered the envelope seal. The most important statement followed. The insert number matched the internal registry entry. The recipient of the copy was indeed listed as Investigator Takeda. The courtroom did not erupt. There were no shouts. Shindo simply stopped flipping pages, and Kuroda lowered his gaze to his folded hands for the first time. The judge said, "The execution of Haruto Mori's sentence is temporarily stayed pending review of newly discovered evidence." I heard the words, but my body did not believe them at once. Haruto closed his eyes. Yui pressed a hand to her mouth. Naomi was already typing a message to her editor. It was not freedom yet. It was not exoneration, but in 2 hours my brother was no longer supposed to be led into an execution chamber. Yamamoto requested that Haruto immediately be transferred into court protection and that Ogawa be located. The judge nodded. Investigator Takeda is also to be brought in. Shindo rose. "Mr. Takeda is not an employee of the Kuroda Corporation," Naomi said quietly. "How quickly you stopped knowing him." Kuroda turned toward her. "Ms. Ito, when your story collapses, I won't sue you. I'll buy the publication that believed you." She raised her phone. "Repeat that more slowly. The headline won't write itself." The judge demanded silence, but Kuroda had already understood his mistake. Security removed Haruto's prison wristband and replaced it with a medical one under court supervision. A small movement. To me, it sounded louder than a gavel. "They did not remove my handcuffs." The judge looked at me. "Your actions will be investigated separately, but the prosecutor's office will no longer receive custody of you without my order." I bowed as far as my hands allowed. "That's enough." From his chair, Haruto muttered, "Not true. He always wants more." At that moment, Naomi's phone vibrated. She read the message and stopped smiling. "The ambulance carrying Ogawa has been found at a closed entrance in Odaiba." Yui stood so quickly her chair fell. "Mom?" Naomi looked at her. "The vehicle is empty. The driver is unconscious. The medics have vanished with her." The stay of execution saved Haruto only temporarily. Without Ogawa and without Takeda, Kuroda could still sever the chain between the ledger and himself. The judge immediately ordered the police notified and assigned a separate team to search for the witness. Shindo requested that an objection be entered into the record. I looked at Kuroda. He did not appear surprised, only slightly weary, meaning Ogawa had disappeared not despite his plan, but according to it. Haruto noticed the same thing. He raised his head. You had her taken while you were driving here. Kuroda calmly answered, "You are far too confident of your own importance." "No," my brother said, "I am confident of your cowardice. Shibata died because you could not bear a single line in a ledger." This time, Kuroda did not smile. Shindo quickly placed a hand on his shoulder, not as a friend but as an attorney closing a dangerous mouth. The judge ordered Kuroda removed after formalizing his obligation to reappear. He bowed and left without haste. That is how people leave when they still have a hostage. Haruto tried to stand. The doctor stopped him. "You need inpatient care." He looked at me. "I need Ogawa. She climbed into this pit because of me." Yamamoto objected. "You are under court protection. You are not going anywhere." Haruto closed his hand around Yui's letter. "Then give me a phone and a city map." Yui approached him. "Mom would not want you risking yourself again." He answered, "Your mother took a risk so they wouldn't kill me. I'm not going to lie here quietly. That was why I needed a living brother, so he would stop me from deciding everything alone and force me to remember. Rescue does not end when an execution is canceled." Naomi showed us a message from the photographer at the pier. Before disappearing, Ogawa had given a nurse one surname, Matsui, a former accountant for the Kuroda Fund. Haruto looked sharply at her. "Matsui handled internal payments to clinics. If they're hiding Ogawa through medical documents, he knows where." I asked, "Where can we find him?" Haruto wiped blood from his lip. "Every dawn he feeds cats at High Shrine. Shibata used to laugh about that habit." The court guard heard us. "You cannot conduct your own investigation." I raised my shackled hands. "I have a fairly convincing limitation." Naomi stepped to the judge and quickly explained Matsui's name. The judge called the senior security officer. "Mr. Mori will indicate the route. You will accompany him." I looked at the handcuffs. The judge added, "Under supervision. Do not mistake this for release," Haruto said quietly. "He'll mistake it anyway." The doctor insisted that Haruto remain in a protected courtroom room. My brother argued until his first wave of dizziness. Then he sat down and struck the armrest angrily with his palm. I crouched beside him while the guard pretended not to hear. "You already stopped the execution. The rest is my turn." Haruto caught my sleeve. "No, the rest is our turn." He placed Ogawa's letter into my hand. On the back was an added note. "Matsui fears not Kuroda. He fears his daughter and the police." I read the line. Haruto said, "His daughter serves in the Financial Crimes Division. If Naomi finds her first, her father will talk." He was not traveling with me. He could not. But again he had given me a direction I did not have. Haruto was no longer a man on a stretcher. He was half of the plan. Yui sat beside him and took his hand. For the first time he did not pull away or try to look stronger than his blood allowed. Naomi put her phone in her pocket. "I'll find Matsui's daughter. You go to the shrine with security," Yamamoto added, "and I'll stay here to keep the court open." Everyone departed through their own door, not like a squad of Avengers, like people to whom Kuroda had left too little time for fear. They led me out through the courthouse service corridor. The handcuffs were fastened in front so I could sit in the vehicle, a small trust under a large written obligation. Before the door closed, I saw Haruto behind the glass of the protection room. He raised 2 fingers. Our old sign, "I'm here." I answered with 3 short taps on the car window. "You're alive." The guard looked at me strangely but did not ask. Naomi was already calling her newsroom and searching for Matsui's daughter. Kuroda disappeared behind a black vehicle, and dawn slowly rose above Tokyo. The execution had been stopped, but Haruto's name still hung on a crime, and Ogawa had vanished along with the last direct path to Kuroda. The court vehicle moved toward High Shrine. I watched the awakening city and understood. Now we were no longer escaping from a prison. We were going after the man who had built one around the truth. I never thought I would go to save a witness in handcuffs and in a court security vehicle. Tokyo brightened outside the window, and I had one address left: High Shrine. An officer named Shiraishi sat beside me. He held my file on his knees and looked at the chain between my wrists once a minute. "Try to escape, and I'll return you to a cell," he said. I looked at the sunrise. My brother has already come out of one cell. I don't need a second. Shiraishi wanted to answer, but his phone vibrated. Naomi had sent a photograph of a woman in a police uniform and a short caption, "Reina Matsui, the accountant's daughter." Matsui had been a former accountant for the Kuroda Fund, Ogawa had named him before she disappeared, and his daughter served in Tokyo's Financial Crimes Division. Kuroda did not hold people with money. He held them with the things they were ashamed of before those closest to them. For Matsui, that person was his own daughter. I asked Shiraishi to contact Naomi. He frowned. You are not commanding this investigation. I raised my shackled hands. Clearly. The call happened anyway, Naomi spoke quickly. Reina refused to believe her father was connected to Kuroda, but she has agreed to come to the shrine. Haruto remained in the courthouse's protected room. The doctor had forbidden him to stand. That did not stop my brother from sending me a message through Yamamoto. Don't pressure Matsui, let his daughter ask. I read those words twice. Haruto had spent a year among people who pressured him. Perhaps that was why he now understood better than I did how fear breaks. At the steps of He Shrine, dawn smelled of wet stone and incense. An elderly man in an old jacket was setting bowls of food near the bushes. The cats came to him without fear. People, apparently, approached him less kindly. When he saw the court vehicle and my handcuffs, Matsui dropped the bag of food. He did not run. He simply bowed and said, "You have the wrong man." An excellent opening line for a conversation with a man who already knows why you have come. I stopped several steps away. Miyuki Ogawa disappeared after naming you. They tried to execute my brother over Shibata's records. Matsui began gathering the spilled food. I have not worked with Mr. Shibata in a long time. I answered, neither has he. He was murdered. Shiraishi warned me with a look. I lowered my voice. We needed a witness, not an old man who would shut himself inside guilt faster than inside a car. Naomi appeared at the gates with a young woman in a dark coat. She walked directly toward Matsui, one hand never leaving the badge hanging from her neck. Matsui saw his daughter and was truly afraid for the first time. Not of me, not of the court, not of Kuroda, only of her face in which trust still remained. Reina stopped before him. Dad, tell me you didn't run Kuroda fund payments through private clinics. He lowered his eyes toward the cat bowls. It was work, he whispered. She answered, work doesn't hide a wounded witness from the court. His shoulders dropped as though he had aged in a minute. Matsui sat on a stone bench. I didn't know about Shibata's murder until Haruto was arrested. I thought we were hiding donations to politicians and doctors. I asked, and when did you learn? He looked at my handcuffs. When Takeda demanded that the clinic payment on the night of the murder be rewritten as charitable aid, Naomi turned on a recorder and placed it openly on the bench. Name the clinic. Matsui covered his face with his hands. Reina did not touch him. Aoba, he said at last. The old rehabilitation wing in Shinagawa. It was closed to patients, but the fund continued paying guards and doctors. I understood before the others. Kuroda had not looked for a new place for Ogawa. He had taken her to the same clinic where he had already held Haruto, just to another wing. Shiraishi took out his phone. I'm calling the police and the judge. Matsui caught his sleeve. No, there are Kuroda's people in the ordinary duty station. Reina looked sharply at her father. He pulled a small metal key from inside his jacket. Shibata left me a copy of the statement. I hid it here. Matsui walked to a stone lantern by the rear path and opened its lower panel. Inside, behind a box of cat food, lay a sealed waterproof envelope. The envelope bore Shibata's seal and a date 1 week before his death. Not a beautiful theory, not a voice in a poor recording. Paper someone had been afraid to destroy. Reina took the envelope with gloved hands and immediately called her supervisor. I need an independent unit and registration of the discovery through a court officer. Matsui looked at her as though he expected hatred. She gave him neither hatred nor forgiveness, only procedure. Sometimes that hurts more. Shiraishi's phone rang. He put it on speaker. Haruto spoke with difficulty, but his voice was clear. The envelope should contain a statement under code Aoba 7. Matsui raised his head. How do you know? Haruto coughed. Shibata showed me an extract. Aoba 7 paid for people who were not officially treated. My brother lay under court protection, could barely keep his voice steady, and was still reading Kuroda's scheme faster than the people around me. I felt pride and anger at the same time. Reina carefully opened the outer package in front of Naomi's camera. The first sheet read, Aoba 7, closed wing, private escort. Transfers followed below. One matched the date Haruto was taken out of prison. The second had been made an hour ago, immediately after Ogawa disappeared. Haruto said, she's there. Not because I'm a genius, because Kuroda pays for lies through the same line item. His voice shook, but not from fear.
Kuroda hid people behind the names of funds and clinics, hoping no one would look twice at one boring line item. But Haruto already had. The brother they were about to execute had found the place where they were holding the witness to his innocence.
Shiraishi received the judge's order within a minute. An independent police unit was on its way to the Aoba wing. I was to remain under guard and not interfere. I looked at him. I've already seen the loading entrance. They'll detect the alarm before the patrol arrives. Shiraishi was silent, choosing between instruction and time. Reina placed the envelope into an evidence bag. I'll go first as an officer from the financial division. My father comes with me and gives a statement on site. Matsui nodded without raising his eyes. He no longer looked like a man trying to save himself, only like a father who had one lie left not to tell his daughter. Naomi came up to my vehicle. The judge will not allow you to take part in the raid. I smirked. Excellent. I don't want to take part in a raid either. You want to go inside? She said. I looked at Shiraishi. He gave a heavy sigh and removed the chain between my hands, leaving the cuffs on my wrists. You remain beside me, he said. One move away, and I put you on the ground. I nodded. Just not on my injured side. We left the shrine in 3 vehicles. Reina and her father went first. The court vehicle followed. Naomi drove behind, sending copies of the statement to the newsroom. 8 minutes from the Aoba wing, Reina braked sharply. Her official car stood at the side of the road with its tires punctured. Matsui turned pale. They know. Reina seized the envelope and transferred into our vehicle. Naomi drove around them and continued without reducing speed. Shiraishi swore and called for backup. The answer came dryly. The nearest unit was delayed by an accident at the interchange. Kuroda was still buying minutes. Haruto called again through Yamamoto. Don't enter by the ramp. The Aoba 7 documents list oxygen deliveries through the old chapel at the rear. I remembered the clinic plan. Behind the wing stood a small room for family farewells. After it closed, they used it to store medical cylinders. Reina looked at the phone. Haruto, how do you remember all of this? He answered, I spent a year proving I wasn't a murderer. There was time to study receipts. We turned into a narrow street behind the clinic. The small chapel stood between the wing wall and the parking lot, unmarked, with a locked wooden door. Naomi was already waiting by the fence. They locked the main entrance after your call to the judge. 2 Kuroda men are at the ramp. No one here so far. Shiraishi showed his identification to the camera above the door and loudly announced the court order. There was no answer, only the click of a lock from inside. The door opened a crack. The elderly nurse I had seen at the clinic looked outside. They moved the woman downstairs. They're preparing a vehicle. I asked, is Takeda here? She nodded, and the man everyone bows to. He arrived 10 minutes ago through the underground entrance. Kuroda himself had returned to the wing. Not because he wanted personally to inflict harm, because Ogawa remained the only voice he did not control. Shiraishi told the nurse to lead us to the stairwell. Reina showed the court order. The nurse looked at Matsui and recognized him. You signed the payments, she said. The old man bowed his head. Yes, today I will sign a statement. She opened the door wider. We entered a corridor between boxes of oxygen masks and folded stretchers. Everything was quiet, too quiet for a place hiding a living witness. Voices sounded from the lower floor. Takeda was speaking irritably. Kuroda answered evenly, like a man who no longer regarded the other as an ally. You should have removed the ledger, Kuroda said. Takeda answered, you should not have transported Ogawa through my case. Naomi lifted her phone and started recording. Reina covered her father's mouth with her hand when he began breathing heavily. We stood behind the door and listened to the crack widen. Kuroda said, you were paid for a result. Right now, the result is lying in court and giving interviews through his lawyer. Takeda gave a dry laugh. Then you've forgotten whose signature is on the clinic order. I am not sinking alone, Mr. Kuroda. There it was. The phrase, the card, the ledger, and Ogawa's words had been missing. Not a confession in court, but the voices of men who had stopped covering for each other for the first time. Shiraishi motioned for us to wait. He sent the recording directly to the court clerk. I did not move. That cost me more than the entire chase. Behind the door came a blow. Then Ogawa screamed. At that moment, procedure ended. Reina was the first to shove the door open, holding her identification in front of her. The basement resembled a small windowless ward. Ogawa lay on a stretcher with one hand strapped down. Beside her stood a doctor with a syringe and a white face. Takeda turned toward us. There was a gun in his hand. Kuroda stood by the table with a folder and looked not at the weapon, but at Naomi's phone. Shiraishi stepped forward. Ryo Takeda, put down the weapon. There is a court order for the witness's protection and your immediate delivery. Takeda looked at Kuroda. Tell them. Kuroda slowly adjusted his sleeve. I did not authorize you to threaten a court officer. Takeda's face changed. Only for a second, but I saw a man realize that all his years of service had ended in a single sentence of denial. You ordered her removal, he said. Kuroda shrugged. You are the investigator. You made decisions. I am merely a concerned citizen. Naomi continued filming. Kuroda noticed it and smiled at her. A recording of a conversation without context. Are you truly building a career on fragments? Ogawa opened her eyes. Her voice was weak, but she had heard enough. I'll provide the context myself. The doctor recoiled from the stretcher. Reina rushed to Ogawa and removed the strap from her hand. Yui was not there, but for the first time Reina's face showed relief that was not official, but human. Takeda was still holding the gun, not pointed at us. Pointed toward the floor between himself and Kuroda, as though he could not decide whom he should fear more now. Kuroda said quietly, Put down the weapon, Takeda. You still have a chance to explain that you acted out of fear of the fugitive. I stepped out from behind Shiraishi, and then you can explain why you were paying for Aoba 7 before Haruto's arrest. Kuroda finally looked directly at me. You think you saved your brother? He said. You saved him several years of trials and a name no one will ever again forget beside a murder. Ogawa's voice came from the stretcher. No, the name beside the murder will be yours. She raised a hand and pointed to a package beneath the table. There are the order transferring Haruto and my retraction statement. Both were prepared before they brought me here, bearing the seal of the Kuroda Fund. Kuroda turned toward the doctor. The man lowered his eyes. For the first time in his circle, no one rushed to hide paper before it could be seen. Reina took the package in gloved hands. Shiraishi stated the time and place of discovery for the recording. Naomi held the camera so steadily, it was as though her hands no longer belonged to her. Takeda slowly lowered the pistol. I will testify, he said. Kuroda smirked. Your testimony is worth exactly as much as your debts. The investigator looked at him with a hatred he had apparently been storing for longer than this night. Then I'll begin with the transfer to your assistant's account. Kuroda stopped smiling. He was not frightened. He simply understood that Takeda had turned from a convenient executor into a man who knew the route of the money. Outside, the footsteps of the independent unit finally thundered. Kuroda moved away from the table and raised his hands before anyone had time to touch him. I will voluntarily remain to provide clarification, he said. The correct phrase? Even caught in a basement, he was trying to look like the master of the procedure. Ogawa caught my sleeve as medics began examining her. Haruto? I answered. Alive. He found you through a single line item. She closed her eyes, and a tear crossed her cheek. Shibata said that boy saw numbers as people. I should have spoken sooner. Speak now, I said. Yui is waiting for you at court. Ogawa nodded. There was more strength in that nod than in all of Kuroda's threats. Shiraishi read Takeda the grounds for detention. The investigator did not resist. He only asked not to be transported in the same vehicle as Kuroda's people. Reina heard him and looked at her father. Matsui stood by the door, hunched as though the whole basement rested on his back. He approached Ogawa. Forgive me. She looked at him for a long time. Say that to your daughter after your testimony. Right now I need court, not regret. Naomi leaned against the wall and lowered her camera for the first time. The newsroom has received the files. In 5 minutes, the story goes out. I looked at Kuroda. He stood between two police officers, but his face remained calm. He still believed the paperwork would never reach a verdict. Shiraishi's phone rang. The judge demanded that Ogawa and the seized documents be delivered immediately. Haruto had insisted on remaining in the courtroom until she arrived. I imagined my brother in a chair, pale, angry, and stubborn. For the first time that night, I wanted not to save him, but simply to sit beside him. Medics moved Ogawa into a vehicle under Reina's guard. Matsui sat in another car, no longer as a fugitive from the truth, but as a witness against it. Takeda was led out after them. As he passed me, he quietly said, Kuroda doesn't keep everything at the clinic. He stores the original orders at the fund. I asked, why are you telling me this? He looked at my handcuffs. Because he has already decided that I signed every order. Kuroda heard us and smiled. Do not believe a man who sold your brother's execution. I answered, I believe only documents. You taught me that yourself. They placed him in a separate vehicle for questioning, without arresting him. Until there was a direct signature beneath the murder, money still bought him the law's caution. We left the Aoba wing in a convoy. Dawn had already turned white, the city was waking, unaware that in one basement someone else's invulnerability had just ended. Naomi rode beside me and scrolled through messages from her editor. The article is out. Kuroda denies any connection to the clinic and calls Takeda a lone actor. Of course. He had cut off the investigator before even arriving at court. Takeda knew it. That was why truth was now his only salvation. Yui met us at the courthouse. She saw her mother's stretcher and ran to her, forgetting the journalists, the security, and all the words she had prepared. Ogawa raised a hand and touched her hair. Yui sank beside her and cried for the first time that night. I turned away. This was not for cameras. Haruto was waiting in the protection room. When the door opened and he saw Ogawa, my brother's face broke, not from weakness, from the fact that she had truly returned. Ogawa extended her hand to him. "Forgive me for staying silent." Haruto shook his head. "You came? That is what Shibata would have wanted." I stood at the door in handcuffs and suddenly understood that I was no longer needed between them. Haruto was speaking for himself. That was exactly why I had gone into the prison. The judge reopened the hearing. Ogawa gave testimony from the stretcher. Matsui confirmed the payments. Reina submitted the statement and the documents found at the clinic. Takeda was brought in last. He looked at Kuroda, who was already seated beside his attorney, and named the amount of the first payment for replacing the recording. Shindo objected that the investigator was trying to reduce his own guilt. The judge answered, "That is precisely why we will verify every transaction he names." Haruto listened, his fingers closed around Yui's letter. When the judge asked whether he demanded immediate release, he rose with the doctor's help. "I demand recognition that I was held under sentence of death on the basis of a fabricated recording," he said. "Freedom without that would simply be another cell." The courtroom went quiet. Yamamoto nodded as though those were precisely the words he had been waiting for. The judge announced the cancellation of the execution order and the beginning of a review of the conviction. It was not final exoneration yet, but Haruto was no longer someone who could be led away at dawn on Takeda's signature. Kuroda stood first. "I will cooperate with the investigation," Naomi whispered quietly. Translation: "He's already preparing the next fire without flames." The judge forbade him from leaving Tokyo until the documents had been examined. Shindo immediately filed an objection. Money had begun working again, even under cameras. As Kuroda passed Haruto, my brother said, "One morning wasn't enough for you." Kuroda stopped and answered, "And one truth won't be enough for you." He left. Not defeated completely, only deprived of the silence in which he was used to destroying people. For men like him, that was already a wound. The guard removed my handcuffs only in the waiting room. Formally, I remained under investigation, but for the first time, my hands were free beside my brother. Haruto held Yui's letter out to me. "Here, I'm tired of keeping other people's secrets." I sat beside him and carefully embraced him, trying not to touch his bruises. He froze, then pressed his forehead into my shoulder. "I thought you wouldn't make it in time." I answered, "So did I. Sometimes honesty sounds better than promises." Naomi entered without knocking. "Bad news. Kuroda has called an emergency press conference in 2 hours. He's going to accuse all of us of conspiracy." Haruto pulled away and wiped his face on his sleeve. "Then bring me a clean shirt." I looked at him. "You need a doctor." He smiled weakly. "I need a microphone." He spoke for me for a year. Now it's my turn. I understood that arguing was both useless and wrong. Outside the courthouse windows, Tokyo had fully awakened. Kuroda still had money, lawyers, and a stage, but this time, Haruto was preparing to step onto that stage with him. Part 8. The doctor forbade Haruto to stand, speak for more than 5 minutes, or leave the courthouse's protected room. My brother listened and asked where he could get a clean shirt. Yamamoto removed his glasses. "You just escaped execution." Haruto adjusted the hospital blanket. "That is precisely why I don't want Kuroda to tell the story first." Naomi set a tablet on the table. A broadcast was already running from the Kuroda Foundation conference hall in Marunouchi. A white logo hung behind the billionaire. Kuroda stood before journalists without his lawyer in frame. A good move. A man who wants to look innocent first removes the attorney beside him. He called Takeda a lone actor who had abused his office. He called Ogawa a frightened bookkeeper. He called me a fugitive who had taken his own brother hostage. Then he paused and said that the Kuroda Corporation had become the victim of carefully planned extortion. Even I had to appreciate the audacity. Haruto watched the screen in silence. His fingers gripped the edge of the blanket. For an entire year they had called him a murderer. Now the man who bought the lie was calling him an accomplice. I turned off the sound. Don't watch. He turned toward me. I watched their version through cell glass. At least now I can answer. Judge Kanda refused to allow Haruto to attend the press conference. She permitted only a recorded statement under the supervision of a doctor and attorney. Haruto heard the decision and did not argue. That worried me more than his shouting would have. Then he asked Naomi to connect with the live broadcast's editor. Is Kuroda taking questions? He asked. Naomi nodded. From accredited journalists. Haruto held out Ogawa's letter and the bank receipt. Then you'll ask my questions, he said. And don't say beforehand where they came from. Let Kuroda choose the wrong answer himself. I smiled before I could stop myself. Haruto noticed. What? I shook my head. Nothing. You've finally started frightening me in the right way. Ogawa lay under court protection in the neighboring medical room. Yui sat beside her. When Naomi explained the plan, Miyuki asked for her bag to be brought in. Inside the bag was an old service pass for the Kuroda Foundation and Shibata's notebook. On the last page were 3 contract numbers and 1 board meeting date. Ogawa said Shibata understood that the payments were not approved retroactively. They allocated money for Takeda and the Aoba clinic in advance. Yamamoto leaned over the notebook. Who signed such payments? Ogawa looked at the screen showing Kuroda, the chairman and the financial manager. Matsui had been the financial manager. Kuroda himself was chairman, but the signature in the statement copy still had to be compared with the original. Matsui waited in the interrogation room. When Reina showed him the notebook page, he sat down so slowly, it was as though an old grave had opened before him. I signed the transfers, he said, but the chairman's authorization came through sealed board protocols. The originals are kept at the foundation. Reina asked, did you see them? Her father nodded. Once. The sheet bore Kuroda's personal seal. I made a copy, but later gave it to Shibata. Ogawa heard this through the open door. The copy was in the ledger. They took it from Takeda. The package the investigator had carried away from the pier mattered again. I looked at Haruto. He was already thinking faster than the rest of us. Kuroda doesn't know whether Takeda's package could still surface. He'll declare it a forgery, Yamamoto said, and the court will demand the original from the foundation. Haruto answered quietly, which is why Kuroda called the press before the court can request the archive. He was not only going to save face, he was going to publicly declare the documents fake and then make sure there was nothing left to compare them against. Reina immediately called her supervisor and demanded a preservation seizure of the foundation archives. The answer was cautious. A new court order was required. Judge Kanda overheard the conversation and took the phone herself. You will file the petition now. Pending the decision, notify the foundation that destruction of documents is prohibited. Haruto shook his head. If you notify them, he'll understand which folder to lose first. The judge gave him a long, stern look. Are you suggesting that the court set a trap? She asked. My brother answered, no. I'm suggesting you not knock on the door of a man holding matches. Naomi gave a quiet laugh. The judge did not laugh, but ordered the clerk to prepare an urgent request without advance notice to the foundation. At least 20 minutes remained before a decision. Kuroda was already answering questions, calmly distributing his version of the night to reporters. He claimed that Ogawa had received money from Shibata and had tried to blackmail the corporation. On the large screen, he displayed a copy of a payment order. Ogawa saw the document and abruptly sat up on the examination couch. That is not my signature. Yui held her by the shoulders. Mom, lie down. We can already hear it. Haruto asked for the image to be enlarged. Naomi took a screenshot. My brother stared at the account number for a long moment and suddenly let out a short breath. He made a mistake, Haruto said. I bent closer. Where? He pointed to the payment purpose line. The Aoba 7 department code. I did not understand. Matsui understood immediately. He stood in the doorway of the interrogation room. That code was created after the wing closed, a month after Shibata's death. Kuroda had just shown the whole country a document that allegedly existed before the murder, but contained a code that appeared later. Naomi grabbed her phone. Should I ask him directly? Haruto shook his head. First, make him confirm the date of the document. A minute later, Naomi's voice sounded in the Marunouchi broadcast. Mr. Kuroda, are you stating that the order was signed by Ogawa before the auditor's death? Kuroda looked across the hall as though he liked the question. Yes. That is precisely what proves Miss Ogawa was concealing her own role. Haruto closed his eyes. Now. Naomi asked the second question. Then why does the document contain the Aoba 7 code, which was registered later? The clicking of cameras became audible in the conference hall. Kuroda did not answer at once. His attorney, Shindo, appeared at the side and placed a note before him. Kuroda read it and smiled. I am not an accountant. Perhaps the code was added during archiving. We will provide explanations to the investigation. Not a bad escape. He did not deny the paper, but placed the mistake on the archivists. Matsui lowered his head. Kuroda was already assigning him the role of the guilty party. Reina approached her father. He'll say you added the code. Matsui stared at the screen and for the first time did not try to hide his hands. Let him say it, he answered. I know where the original protocol lies, in the board vault, behind the portrait hall. Access requires my seal and the chairman's seal. Judge Kanda received the completed petition and signed the order. Shiraishi was to accompany Reina and Matsui to seize the documents. I stepped toward him. I'm going. The judge did not even look up. No, you remain under guard at the courthouse. You have engaged in enough independent action. Haruto said, let him go. I turned toward him. He continued, Kuroda will learn about the order through his lawyer. There will be someone in the archive who does not want witnesses. Shiraishi frowned. I have police officers. Haruto looked at my wrists. And Akira has a habit of climbing into places he isn't allowed. Sometimes it's useful. The judge closed the folder. Mr. Akira Mori goes only as an identifying witness for persons and documents, in handcuffs and under Shiraishi's direct control. I wanted to say thank you. Haruto beat me to it. Don't look happy. I simply can't hit you myself if you lose another piece of paper. Naomi remained at the court with Haruto and Ogawa. Before we left, she slipped a small voice recorder into my pocket. This time, don't drop the camera. Matsui sat in the vehicle beside his daughter. He was silent the entire way. Outside the windows, Marunouchi was already filling with office workers who did not yet know they were walking past a scandal. The Kuroda Foundation occupied the upper floors of an old stone building near the business district. The press conference was underway downstairs. The archive was above, in a restricted section. Shiraishi showed the order to the security service. The shift supervisor read the court seal and immediately called someone, a bad reflex for a law-abiding institution. Reina took the phone from him. Are you notifying management of a court seizure? He answered. I am notifying the legal department. She wrote down his name. We entered the elevator. On the ground floor, through a wall, we could hear Kuroda's voice answering a question about public trust. Even the walls here knew how to lie politely. Matsui pressed the button for the restricted floor with his old card. The indicator flashed red. The former manager's access had already been revoked. Shiraishi placed his court pass against the reader. The elevator moved upward. Matsui looked at his daughter. He expected me to talk. Reina answered, then don't be late a second time. The doors opened onto a quiet corridor with wooden paneling. At the end hung a portrait of the foundation's founder. According to Matsui, the protocol vault lay behind it. We reached the portrait and saw the door open. Shindo, Kuroda's attorney, stepped out of the room with a thin metal case in his hand. He stopped when he saw the order in Reina's hands. A seizure requires the presence of a foundation representative. Shiraishi nodded at the case. You are just in time. Shindo smiled. These are Mr. Kuroda's personal papers, unrelated to the case. Matsui said, that is the Aoba 7 protocol. I registered the folder myself. Shindo's expression did not change, only his fingers tightened around the case handle. Intelligent people rarely confess with words. Their hands do it for them. Shiraishi extended his palm. Put the case on the floor. Shindo slowly complied. Then the elevator doors opened behind us. 2 Foundation guards entered the corridor, not with weapons, with a folder on internal regulations and an order not to admit outsiders into the archive. Shindo said, the court order has not been reviewed by our lawyers. Reina raised her identification. You may review it after you stop obstructing it. The security chief did not move. He was looking not at the document, but at Shindo. Everyone was waiting for one brief command no one wanted to give aloud. I heard a call come through in Shindo's pocket. He answered without taking his eyes off us. Kuroda's voice from the speaker was barely distinguishable, but Naomi's recorder was already running. Don't make a scene near the press, Kuroda said. Give the court everything they officially have the right to obtain. Beautiful words. Shindo understood them differently. He bent toward the case as though preparing to open the lock, then sharply kicked it toward the guard. The guard caught the case and ran for the service door. Shiraishi charged after him. The second guard blocked his path, no longer hiding behind internal procedure. I stepped forward, but my handcuffs were secured to the guard's belt by a short chain. Shiraishi jerked me back. "Don't play hero." Matsui suddenly rushed toward the service door himself. The guard shoved him away and the old man fell to one knee. Reina cried out and lunged toward her father. I stopped waiting for permission. I grabbed a heavy guest folder from a side table and threw it beneath the running man's feet. He tripped without elegance. Face into the carpet, case into the wall. The lock sprang open on impact and folders bearing red seals scattered down the corridor. Shindo took a step toward the documents. Shiraishi stood between him and the floor. "One more move and you'll explain not an archive to the judge, but an assault." Reina picked up the first folder with gloved hands. The cover read, Aoba 7, Closed Medical Expenses, Board Protocol. Seated against the wall, Matsui exhaled. "That's it." His daughter looked at him and for the first time allowed herself to touch his shoulder. A disturbance sounded from the conference hall below. Apparently, journalists had already been told that court officials had entered the Foundation archive during Kuroda's speech. Shindo took out his phone. Shiraishi seized it before he could call. "You can restore communications with your client after the site, and documents are recorded." I looked at the scattered folders. Among them lay a thin folder bearing Takeda's surname and a date matching Shibata's murder. Reina opened it first. Inside was an act transferring a copy of the payment ledger to the investigator, signed by Matsui and approved with Kuroda's personal seal. Not a transfer through an intermediary, not a guess. A document confirming that Kuroda knew of the ledger and handed it to the man who later fabricated the case. Shiraishi's phone rang. The judge demanded a brief report. He named the folder, the signatures, and the place of discovery. Silence held on the line for several seconds. Then the judge said, "Seal the archive, deliver the documents and Mr. Shindo. Until delivery, prohibit Kuroda from leaving the premises." I almost laughed. Kuroda had gone out before the press to bury us before the court could act. Instead, he had gathered witnesses to his own detention around him. Downstairs, Kuroda's voice suddenly vanished from the broadcast. "Naomi sent me one message. He understands." Leaving through parking garage, Shiraishi showed Reina the screen. All of us looked toward the service elevator at the same time. Shindo smiled for the first time in the entire corridor. "You cannot detain a man merely because of documents that have not yet been verified," he said. Reina raised the folder. "But I can ask him to wait." She ran toward the elevator. Shiraishi ordered me to remain with the archive and security. I looked at him. He swore tiredly and unclipped the chain from his belt. "Only beside me," he said. I nodded. "You're beginning to sound like my brother." We burst into the elevator before the doors could close. In the underground parking garage, Kuroda was already walking toward a black car. Around him were two assistants and several journalists running after him with microphones. Naomi stood at the exit with a camera operator. She saw us and asked loudly, "Mr. Kuroda, why was your attorney removing the Aoba 7 protocol?" Kuroda stopped, not from fear. From the understanding that fleeing in front of cameras would be worse than any pause before answering. He turned to the journalists. "The Foundation is cooperating with the court. There was no attempt to conceal documents." His voice remained calm. Reina raised the transparent bag containing the transfer record. "Then confirm your personal seal on the delivery of the ledger to investigator Takeda before Haruto's arrest." It became quieter around us. Kuroda looked at the seal. For a brief instant his face lost its usual softness and became simply angry. He said, "My seal was used by the financial manager." Matsui appeared from the elevator, leaning on the wall. "No, Mr. Kuroda, you applied it in my presence." Reina turned to her father. Naomi raised her microphone. Kuroda looked at the old man like an object that had suddenly decided to speak. "Are you prepared to bear responsibility for your own signatures?" Kuroda asked. Matsui bowed to his daughter, not to him. "For the first time, I am." A second court officer stepped out of the court vehicle holding the judge's order. "Mr. Kuroda, you are required to proceed for immediate questioning and not leave the premises." Kuroda looked at the cameras, the folder, and Matsui. Then he calmly removed his gloves and extended his hands, not for cuffs, but to demonstrate dignity. "I will go voluntarily," he said. Naomi answered, "Excellent. Repeat that beside the report on the kidnapped witness." They placed him in a car without handcuffs. It angered me. Shiraishi noticed. "The law likes to walk slowly." I answered, "The important thing is that today it doesn't stop." Naomi's phone rang. Haruto appeared on the screen from the courtroom room. He wore a clean shirt, pale but with an expression I remembered from childhood. "You went in again without me," he said. I raised my cuffed hands toward the camera. Don't worry, I was accompanied by adults. Haruto saw the folder in Reina's hands and stopped joking. Is that the original? I nodded. He closed his eyes for a second, as though releasing a year of someone else's lie. Then he said, "Bring it to court. I need to finish my testimony, not celebrate, not collapse into an embrace." Finish. I looked at the car in which Kuroda was sitting. He was already speaking to his lawyer through the glass, assembling his next line of defense. The papers in our hands could destroy his legend, but Haruto had been right from the beginning. Until the court called him innocent, the escape was not over. The convoy left the underground parking garage for the courthouse. The press followed, morning sunlight struck the glass, and for the first time the rain remained behind. The convoy entered the courthouse yard beneath camera flashes. I rode beside Shiraishi, still in metal cuffs, while the bag bearing Kuroda's signature rested on Reina's knees. Behind us, Ogawa and Matsui were being transported. Another vehicle carried Takeda. Kuroda arrived first, as though speed could once again restore his right to control the version of events. Yamamoto met me at the service entrance. He saw the Aoba 7 folder and, for a second, stopped looking like a man who had not slept in 2 days. "Is that the original?" he asked. Reina lifted the sealed bag, from the Foundation archive, in front of witnesses. "Your judge will appreciate the chain of custody." I asked about Haruto. Yamamoto looked toward the window of the protected room, alive. Angry, demanding to be present for every page. In other words, he has recovered. I saw my brother behind the glass. The clean shirt did a poor job of hiding the hospital bruises. When our eyes met, he raised an eyebrow at my handcuffs. "They suit you," he said, when I was brought inside. I sat beside him. "You have terrible taste." His smile was weak, but real. I wanted to say it was over. Haruto beat me to it. "Don't you dare. Until the court says who killed Shibata, nothing is over." He was right. The execution had been stopped. But in the court papers, Haruto remained a convicted murderer, while Kuroda still walked into the courtroom as a free man. Judge Kanda returned to the bench several minutes later. This time, before her lay not only petitions but also the documents the Foundation had tried to remove. She looked at all of us. "This hearing concerns the sentence of Haruto Mori. Questions of new crimes will be referred separately for investigation." Shindo rose first. The attorney's face remained calm, although his own case was now lying with the clerk as an item under examination. "The found papers do not prove a personal order by my client," he said. "The chairman's seal may have been used by the financial manager." Matsui lowered his head. I saw Reina's fingers tighten around her folder. Kuroda was once again striking not at the evidence, but at the person beside it. The judge called Matsui. The old man walked slowly to the witness position. He bowed to his daughter, to Ogawa, then to Haruto. He did not grant Kuroda a glance. "I processed fund payments through the closed Aoba 7 account," he said. "Mr. Kuroda personally approved the lists and applied the seal in my presence." Shindo approached. "Are you accusing your employer in order to avoid your own responsibility?" Matsui did not answer him. He looked at Reina. "I am not avoiding it." I signed. I stayed silent. "I let my daughter think I honestly fed cats before work. I will answer for that." Reina closed her eyes. The courtroom became quiet. A confession from a man who asks for no reduction carries more weight than the speech of an expensive lawyer. Shindo tried to return the discussion to the seal. Matsui named the date of the board meeting, the protocol number, and Kuroda's words before the signature. "Shibata must understand the limits." Kuroda turned fully toward him for the first time. "Be careful with your memory, Matsui." The old man nodded. "I was careful. That is why I remember everything." The judge ordered the original protocol opened. Reina handed the bag to the clerk. The court camera recorded every movement of her hands. Inside the folder lay a decision on payment for the closed clinic, escort expenses, and an appendix bearing Takeda's name. At the bottom was Kuroda's personal seal. Shindo stated that a seal was not the same as a signature. The judge answered, "That is precisely why the court will hear witnesses, not only your interpretation of ink." Ogawa entered next. The doctor pushed the stretcher slowly. Yui walked alongside, holding her mother's hand. Haruto tried to rise, but she stopped him with a look. "Sit down, boy," Ogawa said. "You have already spent too long standing in place of the adults." Haruto obeyed, probably for the first time all night. She told them about Shibata, about how he found the payments from the Kuroda fund, about how he placed the ledger in a bank safe deposit box once he realized he was being watched. Haruto made a copy of the video and wanted to take it to a lawyer, she said. "After Shibata was murdered, I became afraid, but he refused to stay silent." Haruto lowered his eyes. I knew that expression. He was not proud of his own courage. He still believed he might have saved Shibata sooner. Ogawa continued. Takeda came to me after Haruto's arrest. He showed me a photograph of my daughter and said that either I forgot about the ledger or I would lose another person. Yui tightened her grip on her hand. Shindo asked why the court should believe a woman who had stayed silent until this night. Ogawa looked at him calmly. It should not believe my fear, she said. Let it believe the bank seal, the card from the amulet, the clinic, and the folders you tried to remove. Naomi drew a quiet breath at the wall. Even the judge kept her eyes on Ogawa longer than usual. Kuroda did not move. Only his fingers no longer lay neatly still. Then Takeda was brought in. He wore no tie and his left cheekbone was swollen after the pursuit. For the first time he looked not like an official, but like a man under questioning. He saw Kuroda and smirked. I assume I acted alone now. Shindo objected, but the judge ordered Takeda to answer only regarding Haruto's case. The investigator confirmed that he took the amulet after the trial, confirmed that the memory card was inside, confirmed that he concealed it from the defense. I felt Haruto beside me stop breathing evenly. He had waited a year for those words. In one sentence, Takeda admitted that my brother had not been allowed to defend himself. Shindo asked, "Were you promised reduced charges in exchange for testimony?" Takeda looked at him. "No, I was promised Kuroda would not learn my cell address." Kuroda turned to the judge. "This is the blackmail of a frightened man." Takeda laughed. "No, your transfers were blackmail. This is merely belated honesty." He described how he received a copy of Shibata's ledger through the Foundation, how, after the murder, he was ordered to close the case quickly, how the video was replaced with a certified altered version. The judge asked, "Who delivered the altered recording to you?" Takeda looked at Kuroda, then at Shindo, the chairman's assistant, on his direct instruction. Shindo immediately demanded that the testimony be excluded as an attempt to shift guilt. The judge refused. "The weight of these words will be examined, but the court will hear them." I watched Kuroda. He did not argue with Takeda directly. He understood that every sharp word spoken beside cameras would become another piece of evidence. When Haruto's turn came, the doctor helped him stand. My brother gently but firmly pushed my hand away. This time, I allowed him to walk on his own. He stood before the judge, pale, with a bandage on his arm, and Ogawa's letter in his pocket. Not a single photograph of a murderer looked like him now. "My name is Haruto Mori," he said. "A year ago, I saw a payment Shibata intended to deliver to the prosecutor's office. I thought the law would protect us." He told them how he handed Shibata the folder in the parking lot, how he heard a blow behind the car, how he picked up the knife while trying to move it away from an injured man. "I shouted for someone to call an ambulance," he said. In the court's version, my shout disappeared. All that remained was a frame of me holding the knife, a convenient story, just not mine. Both recordings were shown on the courtroom screen. First the one that had convicted him, then the original, found in the amulet and registered by Yamamoto. In the real video, Haruto ran toward Shibata, fell beside him, and called for help. In the false one, his run ended on a single raised knife. I did not watch the screen. I watched my brother. He did not turn away. For the first time, he was seeing his worst night beside people who were now required to listen. Shindo stood. The memory card was in the possession of a man who unlawfully left detention. The edit could have been created after the escape. Haruto turned toward him. "Then explain the advertising screen in your version, and the bank receipt, and Takeda's signature, and my blood in the clinic." He spoke without shouting. That was what worked. Kuroda had built his defense on the image of desperate liars. Haruto gave him not a single hysterical moment. This is
the moment the entire escape was for. Akira could carry his brother out of a cell, but only Haruto could stand before the court himself and reclaim his name. Not as a victim, not as a rescued boy.
As a man they tried to erase, who spoke anyway. The judge announced a recess to verify the video recording, the bank registry, and the Foundation protocols. 20 minutes. For Haruto, they were longer than a year. They took him to the medical room. I walked alongside under Shiraishi's guard. My brother sat on the examination couch and suddenly began to laugh. Quietly, almost soundlessly. I was frightened. What happened? He wiped his face with his palm. I kept thinking I would forget Shibata's voice, but in the video he's scolding me about my folder. I crouched in front of him. "It isn't your fault you weren't in time." Haruto looked at me. "I know. But knowing that and stopping carrying it are different things." I found no clever phrase. I simply put my palm on his shoulder. For the first time, he did not joke it away or push me off. He simply allowed me to be beside him. Yamamoto entered with a phone against his ear. The court experts have confirmed that both recordings share the same original segment. The prosecution version was altered. Haruto closed his eyes. Yamamoto continued. The bank confirmed the ledger and insert. The prosecutor's office is withdrawing its objections to overturning the conviction. I waited for joy. Instead, I felt emptiness, like after a long run when the body does not yet understand that it no longer has to keep falling forward. Haruto whispered. Say it again. Yamamoto removed his glasses. Your execution has been permanently canceled. The prosecution no longer supports the murder charge. My brother covered his mouth with his hand. He did not cry immediately. At first, he simply folded over as though trying to protect his stomach. Then the air left him in a broken rush. I embraced him carefully. Haruto clutched my shirt in his fingers. I didn't want to die as a murderer, he said. You won't, I answered. The door opened, and the clerk asked everyone to return to the courtroom. Journalists' voices were already audible in the corridor. The truth had finally stopped being a whisper. Judge Kanda read the decision calmly. The conviction of Haruto Mori was overturned. The execution terminated. He was to be released from custody after a medical examination. She also referred the materials on Shibata's murder, the substitution of evidence, Ogawa's kidnapping, and Haruto's unlawful detention to a special investigative group. When my brother's name was spoken without the word convicted, Yui cried. Ogawa closed her eyes. Yamamoto lowered his head onto his folder and no longer concealed his relief. Haruto stood again. This time, I did not reach to support him until he placed his own hand on my shoulder. We walked to the exit together. Kuroda rose with his attorney. Shindo was already whispering to him about the appeals process. But two investigators from the independent group stood at the courtroom doors. One of them read Kuroda a notice of detention on suspicion of obstruction of justice and unlawful confinement of a witness. Even now, Kuroda did not flinch. You are detaining a man on the basis of fraudster's words. Haruto stopped in the aisle and turned toward him. No, he said. On the basis of papers you considered boring. Shibata warned you. Numbers can testify too. For the first time, Kuroda looked at him not from above, not as expendable material, as a man he should have feared sooner. Takeda was handcuffed separately. As they led him away, he paused beside me. You still broke the law to get inside. I nodded. I know. He waited for an excuse but did not receive one. My brother was innocent. I was not, and I did not need someone else's forgery to admit it. Takeda looked away. Then you're stupider than I thought. From behind me, Haruto weakly answered, No. Not everyone is afraid to answer for his own choice. The press met us on the courthouse steps. Shiraishi tried to shield me with his body, but Haruto touched his arm. I'll say a few words. He stood before the microphones in someone else's clean shirt, with a bruise on his face and a hospital wristband on his wrist. No beautiful victory, only a living man. I was sentenced for a murder I did not commit, he said. Today the court overturned that sentence. But Shibata is still dead. He named Ogawa, Yui, Yamamoto, Naomi, Seki, Fujita, and the clinic nurse. He did not name me first. Rightly so. This story was larger than one brother. I do not want my release to become a happy ending for the people who bought this case, Haruto concluded. I will testify until the end. Naomi stood aside and asked no questions. She simply recorded every word. Kuroda was led out through another entrance, but the cameras had already turned that way. After his statement, I was taken to a separate room. Yamamoto came in with a second folder. My name was written on it. There was my part of the morning. I was charged with unlawful entry into the archive and escape from custody. I read the report to the end and signed my statement without bargaining. Haruto entered without knocking, now accompanied by a doctor. I'll say you were saving my life. I shook my head. You'll tell the truth. That's enough. He sat opposite me and glared angrily at my signature. You're insane. I smirked. Runs in the family. You just proved it to the whole country. 3 months later, the Tokyo court officially acquitted Haruto in Shibata's murder case. The decision expressly identified the replacement of the video recording and the concealment of evidence. Takeda admitted part of the charges and testified against Kuroda. He did not become a good man. He simply finally chose the side with fewer lies. Matsui was charged for participating in the concealment of payments. Reina attended every interview as an officer, not as a daughter. It was more honest than forgiveness. Ogawa recovered. Together with Yui, she attended Shibata's memorial service. Haruto stood beside them holding the restored omamori. Kuroda denied ordering the replacement of the recording until the end. But the Foundation protocol, the clinic, Takeda's testimony, and his voice from the pier left his lawyers little air. A year later, the court found him guilty of concealing evidence, pressuring witnesses, and unlawful deprivation of liberty. The case concerning Shibata's murder continued separately. I received a suspended sentence for entering the archive and violating custody restrictions. Haruto argued louder than the prosecutor. I considered the decision fair. On the day my restrictions were lifted, he waited for me at the courthouse gates with 2 cups of coffee and a bag of mochi from that same shop. "The last one is mine," he said. I looked at his nose. "We've already tested how that ends." For the first time, he laughed with no pain in his voice. We went to Asakusa. At the shrine, Haruto held the omamori in his palm for a long time. Then, instead of leaving it on the altar, he tied it back onto his bag. "Thought you'd get rid of it," I said. He shrugged. "It's good at storing memory cards, and it reminds me that silence costs more." I looked at my brother. A year earlier, his name had stood beside the word murderer. Now he was helping Yamamoto on cases involving fabricated accusations. He noticed my gaze. "Don't start protecting me from work." I raised my hands. "I wasn't going to." He narrowed his eyes. "Now you're definitely lying." We descended the temple steps into the noise of the city. I had not given Haruto back the past year. I had not brought Shibata back. I had not made the world honest with a single escape. But my brother walked beside me. His name was clean. His voice no longer belonged to Takeda's record, Kuroda's money, or the glass of a visitation room. Haruto bumped my shoulder. "Where now?" I looked at the road and answered, "Home. Tomorrow we'll decide together." He nodded. For the first time, I did not need to walk ahead in order to shield him with my body. The escape ended not at a prison wall. It ended here, when we walked out of someone else's lie side by side.